I was 2 years old when I was dedicated to the cause of Lucifer. I was, at that point, a seventh-generation witch.
I was laying there, practically naked, and I had her hold me as if I was a baby. I couldn't talk. I couldn't open my eyes. I believe my eyes were rolled up back in my head.
There was evidence of human sacrifice on this site. One of my first questions I asked the guy, is there evidence of human sacrifice? Now looks around there, yes. We found the man with his fingers like, who was a Richard Sacrifice.
And it started to come down the stairs, and there was disgusting smell. And at that point, just basically said, do you know what they did to us? And that's when I fled that home.
But no, they would touch me. They would put pictures in my head if they wanted to communicate with me. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Implants are real, okay? You know, we've got them on X-ray, we've got them on CAT scan, we've got them on the Gauss meter, which measures magnetic field 7.5. We've got them on an ultrasound machine. It's right there. It's hard physical evidence, not delusionary.
All right, well, who's starting? Who's going to do the intro this time?
Oh, you said you would.
Oh, did I say I would?
Or, well, yeah, Jeff did it last time. Jeff wasn't here last time.
No, Jeff wasn't here last time. Okay. Yeah.
Well, now you put me on the spot.
We're good at that. Silence. Well, welcome to Conspirinormal, guys.
Well, now I feel I don't want to drop the ball. Okay, so here we go. Welcome.
3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to Conspirinormal with your host Adam Sane.
That was awesome.
And Jeff.
Job, man.
And Rob.
And me.
And Rob Areno.
Don't you love when people wait till you're about to start talking and then you say something?
I feel like that happens to me all the time, but it's because I hesitate a lot. Uh-huh. If I just like jumped in and was like asserted myself, it wouldn't happen. But I'm like, maybe they're going to say, nope, they're done. Okay, now I'll talk. Oh, no, there's more.
Well, when we have those awkward silences like that, you need to put in some weird noises or something. Rob, maybe just like
one of those gates. Yeah. The gates that it plays music in the background, but as you talk, it fades it out.
Ooh, yes.
That would be classy.
Ooh, very nice.
Mm-hmm. Some elevator
very
music.
Nice. Yes. Well, it has been an interesting week. We're coming towards the end of 2016. And last time we had on Micah Hanks with a little bit of a surprise show. As we said then, although we did not have Jeff with us that time, we talked about the little party that you guys had for Alyssa and some of the songs that you guys played. Hey, Jeff, a good job, by the way. That was an awesome, just to you, I have not told you yet, that was an awesome show you guys put on the other night.
Well, thank you.
We practiced so much that it felt really weird not getting together this past week.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if you felt that way, but I was just like, I feel like there's just something missing from my life now.
Well, I was going to call you guys to see if you wanted to come over and just like run the set real fast, but you had said, well, let's take a week off or whatever. So I was like, okay. And yes, I did say that in a mopey voice just to kind of get under your skin.
Fine.
Are there any plans to extend this out?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Because you guys did, a really awesome job.
We will be for hire soon. And
parties, weddings, whatever you got.
Yeah, whatever.
By the way, did anybody record anything besides just maybe a few seconds? Did anybody record any whole songs or anything like that?
Yeah, I've seen some songs.
Okay.
We can maybe tack one on the end of the episode.
Yeah, if you've got something,
I think I do.
We should do that for sure. It's a cover, so it's okay. It's copyright. Yeah. Even though it might be copyright.
We put a lot of work into it, therefore we can do whatever we want.
Well, it was for no money also, so
right.
It's not like
I still love that improvisation you guys did at the end of Psycho Killer.
Yeah, that went over.
That was excellent. And of course, Micah joined you guys for the We're Not Gonna Take It. And I got to sing. I got to mess you up on Psycho Killer, by the way.
You didn't mess me up.
I was very impressed that you learned the French parts of that song.
Well,
I did tell you that night. I was pretty
think
impressed
we rehearsed
by
that more than anything.
Yeah.
That and with it.
I just thought you were just going to be like something in French, which is where I messed you up, by the way. But
Well, actually, I messed you up a couple of times because if you listen to the song, the chorus, the Psycho Killer, it always repeats twice. But the first time it's oh, and then the second one is oh yeah. It does all of that stuff. You don't realize it. You think it's just every time it does all of that.
Yeah.
So there you go.
which that song was a little bit out of the ordinary because that song was actually in the 70s. But
Yes.
it was part of the 80s party, but it was still appropriate. And I was up there with my little energy dome, my Devo energy dome that I borrowed from Dr. Future. So I think that was a hit of the party, was me with my Marty McFly jacket and my energy dome. Me and Micah ended up going to Ross and found some sunglasses and that's where we found our costumes, actually, was at Ross. Yeah.
You can find anything at Ross Dress for Less. That's where you buy pink salt.
They're not paying us, by the way, yet.
Yeah, yet.
Now, last time we had Micah in the studio, we had Justin, his friend that is in the band Three Doors Down, and then his friend Jeremy London. All those three of those guys grew up in Asheville or around there. And we were talking about, one of the subjects we were talking about, if you didn't hear that show, we were talking about Pizzagate. And I kind of want to delve into that a little bit tonight. Because at the time, and any other time when we had Chris Walford on, I had barely really even looked into it at that point. And I just thought there was really nothing to it. I thought it was kind of ridiculous. I still think the whole spirit cooking thing is a little spurious and nothing there.
Right. That part for sure.
Yeah. Now, there are some weird links which we might get into and talk about. But this last week, the reason that I decided to sit down and really look into that, because there was, on the day that we actually recorded that show, and unbeknownst to us when we were recording, and to Micah, because me and Micah didn't find out till the next morning before he was about to leave, there was an incident at the restaurant Comet Ping Pong. So, Rob, if you have that clip ready, this will explain a little bit of this, and we'll talk about this guy, and then I want to talk a little bit more into the bigger aspects of this case.
File this under what happens when fake news stories use the names of real people and places, but not real facts. Authorities say a guy named Edgar Madison Welch of Salisbury, North Carolina, walked into this pizza restaurant in upper northwest Washington over the weekend. It's been here for years. He had a rifle in his hand, apparently fired at least one shot. No one was injured. People apparently scattered when they saw the guy with the gun. Authorities, when they sat down and interviewed Welch, say he admitted to them he was here to self-investigate the now notorious internet conspiracy theory known as Pizzagate, which alleges in part that the restaurant, along with Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, were somehow involved in a child sex ring. All false. Now, Welch was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. No one was injured. And the owner put out a statement essentially saying this shows the consequences of what happens when people use lies on the internet.
Okay. Couple of things. One thing to unpack here is this latest meme, which is the idea of fake news,
Right.
quote unquote. Pizzagate, any of that aside, I find this very interesting as a new euphemism for conspiracy theory. When you think about conspiracy theory and where that came from, we just had not too long ago talking about the JFK assassination. And we were talking about how I think Craig mentioned that conspiracy theory was come up with to counter the people that were questioning the official version of JFK. So the term conspiracy theorists started out as a disparaging term against those people. Later on, it became more of a into the lexicon. People embraced the idea of a conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist. Okay. So I think the fake news meme is a new way of just castigating conspiracy theorists. You're hearing this a lot in the mainstream media now. Fake news, fake this, fake that. In fact, they were interviewing some people. I think NPR or somebody was interviewing people that were around Comet Ping Pong after this incident took place that we're about to talk about. And the guy said, people have been listening to fake news. Now, that being said, there is such a thing as fake news. We see it all the time on these clickbait sites.
Right.
This happens. However, something like Pizzagate to me does not necessarily constitute fake news. This is a lot of people out there speculating about what could be happening, but it's not necessarily fake, and it's not necessarily news.
Yeah, and there's a very good chance that there's nothing going on and that all of these theories or ideas are wrong. Mm-hmm. However, unless there's been some sort of investigation or something to prove the contrary, it's not fake.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is dangerous.
True.
Because people are going to hear it and they're just going to divulge it to somebody else. They're not going to go and check it out.
They do that with everything on the internet, though.
Well, but it's still it's dangerous to do that. I mean, this is Fox News, I mean, I want to talk about this Edgar Madison Welch guy. This guy that went into Comet Ping Pong with a rifle to go in and quote unquote investigate the rumors of this child sex trafficking ring. Okay. So let's stick to him for just a bit. All right. This is from heavy.com. This is from, and I love the title of this article. They do this periodically. Edgar Madison Welch, 5 fast facts you need to know, as if you don't need to know anything else about the guy, honestly. But we'll read number 1 here. Okay. Welch surrendered to police after he found no evidence underage children were being harbored in the restaurant. Edgar Madison Welch told police he had read online that the Comet restaurant was harboring child sex slaves and that he wanted to see for himself if they were there. He stated he was armed to help rescue them. He surrendered peacefully when he found no evidence that underage children were being harbored in the restaurant, according to Fox 5 DC. You can read the full charging documents filed by prosecutors below. Welch brought 2 guns into the restaurant, police said in a press release. They described the gun he was armed with as he entered Comet Pizza as an assault rifle in a tweet. A 3rd gun was found in his vehicle, police said. Interim D.C. Police Chief Peter Newsham told the Washington Post officers responded within minutes after the first call and surrounded the restaurant. The packed restaurant located in the 5,000 block of Connecticut Avenue was evacuated along with other nearby businesses. Welch fired at least 1 shot into the floor of the restaurant after it was empty, NBC Washington reports. His demeanor was bizarre in that if you come into a place to eat, you ask for a host or grab a seat at the bar. Bartender Lee Elmore told the news site, didn't make any eye contact, didn't talk with anybody. Newsham said Welch surrendered about 45 minutes after he walked into the restaurant, according to the Post. An employee of the restaurant told the owner of a neighboring store, Bradley Graham, that Welch went into the kitchen of the restaurant, presumably looking for the alleged tunnels used to hide, torture, and traffic children, the Post reports. Gareth Wade, who was eating pizza in the restaurant, told the Post a server came out and said a man had just walked into the building, passed us into the back of the building. He seemed to have a shotgun or a rifle type of gun and said we ought to vacate the building. Other people have gone to the restaurant to search for the tunnels, WUSA TV reports. They're putting a lot of curses and spells over the city. A woman who was trying to find the tunnels told WUSA, all this underground tunnel that helps them take the kids and transport them back and forth so they can do these rituals. Another person entered the restaurant and live streamed video during a busy dinner hour. I told you about that guy. The New York Times reports. Okay. So basically, this dude, Edgar Madison Welch, walks into Comet Ping Pong in Washington, D.C., with a rifle and apparently another gun, I guess, stashed on his person. Apparently, people
left the building immediately, leaving him only inside, where apparently he was looking for these underground tunnels where these children are supposedly being harbored to be taken for these satanic rituals. Apparently he found nothing.
What?
And I guess he shot into the floor and then promptly went outside. And when the police got there, the police got there. No, he was going to save one of the kids. That's what he said.
Yeah, but you don't shoot into the floor, into the tunnels. I mean, come on.
That's what he was. But he went outside and he surrendered to the police. Okay. So that's it. That's all that happened. Thankfully, nobody died. Nobody was killed. Just this idiot, and I will stress idiot, walked into this restaurant with a gun in his hand. I almost cursed. With a rifle in his hand, scaring the shit out of people. And it was this huge incident. Now, what I have loved to also have seen over the past few days is people saying this is a false flag. This was the media. This was set up by the media. This was set up by somebody to deflect attention from Pizzagate. All this different stuff. No, I just think it's just a guy that got worked up over this stuff, decided that he was going to go investigate, figured that he could not do it in any kind of civilized manner. So he went in there threateningly with a gun. And with the idea that he was going to save people. And in credit to another podcast where I heard this, apparently this guy had like some kind of Rambo complex where he figured he was going to be the bright, shining knight and save the day. That's it.
Well, so he didn't think to go to a Catholic church where it is going on? Is that?
Yeah.
Do we get?
Yeah. Well, okay. Very good point there, Jeff, because this has happened. This kind of thing has happened in other aspects, other avenues.
Mm-hmm.
You see it happen all the time. Now, what's interesting to me is that this guy walked in there and he really thought that there were kids, or suspected that there were kids inside these tunnels.
After all the heat that's been around us, they're still there in that restaurant.
Right. This has been in the fake news for quite a few months now, right? So for maybe a month and a half, something like that.
I heard about it at least a few weeks ago, maybe a month.
Yeah. So these guys, he really thinks that these guys, even though they've got all this heat on them right now and all this attention being put on Comet Ping Pong, and the owner, James Alefantis, you really think that if they are involved in a child sex predator ring with satanic ritualistic overtones, that they would be actually still harboring children inside the restaurant?
Yes. Wait, no, that'd be insane.
Yeah.
But
somehow this guy in his mind thought that this was happening.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about. What is the history? What's Edgar's history? Has he been committed or anything like?
There's a couple of other things on here. Apparently this guy,
thank God he had access to guns.
They were saying that he struck a teenager with his car in October in 2016. A lot of the pictures of him.
Man, he's really not a big champion for kids.
Yeah, a lot of the pictures of him are either pictures of him with, or either him out enjoying nature, or with a bunch. He's one picture of him like taking
white coats around him.
No, well, there's one picture of him with a pickup truck full of 12 packs of beer. Yeah, he apparently said Welch, number 5 is Welch was charged with assault with a dangerous weapon and the investigation is ongoing. So probably this is somebody that's a little bit maybe unhinged, maybe a little strange, maybe getting worked up by the things that they're seeing on the internet and figuring, or maybe they have some kind of hero complex or some kind of weird complex, and they're going to go say, I'm going to go investigate this for myself, drive to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to save these kids if they're in there and all this.
Typically, though, they have a history of mental illness, or they've even got it in their family.
I don't know if anybody knows about it.
Okay.
I do want to play this, though. This is interesting. Here's our 6 degrees of separation. And this might put a little bit more to answer your question. The guy we had in here last week, Justin, his girlfriend was in here with us. So she wasn't on the mic. Her name is Chris. And apparently she's from the Charlotte area, which Salisbury, North Carolina, where this guy is from, is not too far from. And apparently her family, some members of her family knew this guy and saying that he had that his whole family is a little weird and whack. So this is from the Grayling Report. This is what Micah says. And here's our little 6 degrees of separation with Edgar Madison Welch.
Here's what's funny. Over the weekend, this article was brought to my attention by none other than our friend Justin Biltman from Three Doors Down. And he wrote to me, he says, so here's something weird. Sends the article to the New York Times article and says, so, with a lot of so-ohs, the guy who did this is from my girlfriend's hometown, and she knew him through other people.
So he is real.
No, of course he can't really be real.
Oh, okay.
Now Justin's working for the government.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry.
Justin Biltman probably isn't your real name, by the way, and I know you're listening, and you probably don't really play with Three Doors Down. No, that's your CIA name. Yeah.
And that's why they do all the USO stuff. And
they're in league with yeah, exactly. See,
Okay.
I was lured, I was brainwashed, mind controlled, led to his apartment, then he sits in on the Conspirinormal. Oh, coincidence, right? Justin Biltman then sits in on a podcast called Conspirinormal with me and Adam Sane, and Jeremy London's been co-opted to get out, Jeremy. Get out while you still can, all right? Get out!
this all makes perfect sense now.
Yeah, it's all a big conspiracy.
All right. So that was from Micah's. That was from the Grayling Report. I just thought that was interesting and funny. So his girlfriend knows tangentially, I guess, a couple of degrees probably from this guy. And then we had Justin sitting on the show on Conspirinormal. So I thought that was fairly interesting.
Yeah, that's a weird little...
Canary Cry Radio, Gons, who we've had on the show, actually had this guy on his friends list and was freaking out a little bit about it. The reason what Micah was referring to in that clip, people have said that this is a false flag or this is some kind of setup, is because Edgar Madison Welch apparently had an IMDb profile. And I guess he had been in a couple of independent films. And so people were saying, well, look, he's an actor. He's an actor. It's clearly staged. Which... one of us in this room has an IMDb profile as well.
So, anyway, moving right on.
Of which, well, let me make the point that just because somebody has an IMDb profile does not mean that they are a false flag set up.
I disagree.
By intelligence agencies. Okay. Or by the mainstream media.
That's a good. Well, again, it goes back to I would like to know his history. There's got to be some kind of mental illness in his family, or he has.
Yeah, maybe.
I'll tell you this.
Maybe
going along the IMDb page, there are some delusions of grandeur that go along, and you have to have those in order to be an actor. I know this.
Good point.
I've been told, and so.
And that sounds like what he had, right?
Well,
a little bit of delusions of grandeur.
I do want to throw this out there as far as the I would say I don't believe this was a false flag, but there was that edge to the news reports, which constantly throwing out the word fake news at you. That has this sort of it had this vibe like if we tell you something, you listen to it and you believe it attitude, which is also just as dangerous. So
I agree. And you also know that at a certain point, at this point now, with the way the internet is and the way social media is, that eventually you are going to get some idiot or some mentally unhinged person that is going to pull something like this.
Right.
So it's almost like you use a rubric and you say, okay.
And let's hold that person accountable, not everybody else.
Right. Exactly. X + 2 equals, crazy guy with a gun trying to look for the tunnels. One thing I wanted to point out about the tunnels aspect, I found this interesting, and this kind of set me on a quest this entire week of looking into Pizzagate, finally giving it the time that I felt that it deserved to be looked into. But the tunnels thing is reminiscent of the Mick Martin preschool case. in that case, we talked a little bit about this a few shows ago. Remember, we had Tom Dunn on, and we talked a little bit about it as well. In that case, there were supposedly these tunnels that were underneath the school, and they did actually find tunnels that were underneath the school, but whether they were used for what they reported and the kids said they were used for is a whole other matter. I don't want to get into that, but it's very reminiscent of that case. So either you're dealing with something that is a figment of somebody's imagination, or there is some kind of real link to it. So that being said, and all this about Edgar Madison Welch being said, the only thing that I'm going to say is if people are going to get themselves worked up, don't be an idiot. Don't go out and do this kind of stuff, whether it's real or not. You know, these people, if they are doing bad things, they will get their justice in the end, whether that's when they die or in this world, whatever. But, you know, this guy now has caused a bunch of problems, a shitload of problems for himself.
Yeah.
He's probably going to go to jail. He's, you know,
questioning things, even no matter how far out there they might be,
right.
Questioning them with friends, questioning them on the internet, talking about it is fine. Don't go anywhere with a gun.
Yeah.
And try to solve.
Because to him, he's going in there and saying, I'm going to save these kids. Well, to everybody else, he just looks like a maniac. And especially in Washington, D.C., you're going to walk in somewhere with a gun, they're going to be on you like flies on shit. Mm-hmm. Okay? That city does not mess around with anybody with a gun. All right. So, catch my breath here. All that being said, I want to talk a little bit about Pizzagate. We do have Walter Bosley coming on tonight, and after that, I'm going to have Thad McCracken come on because he wrote an article that I thought was very important, some of the things that he said about there being a witch hunt mentality behind Pizzagate. But I want to look at, and help me out with this, Rob, because you studied this too, some of the aspects of this case that may lean to it actually being a pedophile ring. And we talked a little bit about this last week with Micah about the WikiLeaks emails. The code word, apparently pizza being a slang for little girls, hot dogs being a slang for little boys. Apparently, where people are looking at this from the Pizzagate, on all these Reddits, which is now closed down, by the way, and all these other websites are saying that this is all slang. I guess that the FBI said this is slang for little boys, little girls. There's a lot of other aspects, a lot of weird stuff, like the $65,000 for pizza and hot dogs that's in the WikiLeaks emails.
Which seems strange, but the government has a habit of spending tens of thousands of dollars on like a hammer.
That's true. I have heard some people say that very rarely are things catered in Washington, D.C. They're not usually flown in from some other place, unless they just wanted Chicago deep dish pizza, which is possible. But then there's another reference in the same email, like what can we get the same waitresses this time? That's a little weird. Okay. Some other people have looked at just Comet Ping Pong in and of itself. And this guy, James Alefantis, who is the owner of Comet Ping Pong, have looked at his, Instagram account. And there are some strange things there. And then there are some things that are not as strange. Some of the pictures that I saw.
Right. Well, see, he is of all the little aspects of this whole theory, he's the one where I'm just like, yeah, I think there is something up with that guy, whether that translates to a giant ring that's, involving other government officials or whatever. I'm not convinced at all, but he definitely seems a little off.
Yeah. Well, here's about the emails, first of all. References to this is from voat, voat.co, which is where I think a lot of this stuff has gone over to this website now that Reddit has been closed down. This is in the emails. Reference to pedophilia via known torpedo code like cheese pizza in the Podesta emails, such as the handkerchief pizza map being left behind. Handkerchiefs are used as code for sexual preferences, and victims of pedophilia express that it's collected as a souvenir after being placed under the victim. Other code words found in the emails like playing dominoes on cheese or pizza, and an email titled pizza.jpg where the message is doesn't get any better than this, with an attachment of a little girl eating pizza with two females who happen to be women captured investigating human trafficking in NK Unilite. I don't know what that is. A worthy linked government email to check out where pizza is obviously a code word. Who all is in the Austin office today who is going to want pizza? We only have one slice and we need to know how thinly to slice it. That's strange. That's a strange way of talking about pizza.
That is a strange way to talk
Okay.
about pizza.
Email from Tom Luzzatto saying how children of 11, 9, and 7 will be in the pool for further entertainment. Okay. Also, it's very eerie how the Podesta brothers match this is interesting, although I think tangential. Apparently, the Podesta brothers, they say that the people that are the sketches in the Madeleine McCann case, the little girl that went missing in Portugal way back, I think in like 2003, they say looks like John and Tony Podesta. That's weird. Although I don't necessarily know, that could be very, very far-fetched, but this is interesting for me. Andrew Breitbart seemed to think the Podestas were involved in sex trafficking back in 2011 when he tweeted about it before he died. The tweet is most likely in response to the Acorn scandal where Planned Parenthood was found to be aiding in underage prostitution, as found by an undercover investigator recording. Podesta was conveniently appointed to investigate the scandal. That's interesting. Now, talking about Comet Ping Pong. Comet Ping Pong in D.C. is not surprisingly found in the Podesta emails. It is a restaurant that several high officials are tied with, including Hillary, along with a couple other restaurants nearby with possible connections and galleries where Hillary is seen, and that billionaire George Soros, along with others, donated over $20,000 to. WAPO, Washington Post, reported that sex slavery is a big problem in D.C. Another worthy email from the Podesta leaks saying do not forward, where it had Hillary's logo and the attachment with a pizza slice in it with Comet Ping Pong's name. The family-friendly restaurant Comet Ping Pong is owned by James Alefantis, a.k.a. Jimmy Comet. His Instagram has unusual pictures, such as a child taped to a ping pong table, joking about a kill room, calling a baby a hotard, a baby picture with chicken lover comment. We talked about that last week. That's disturbing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This guy I find.
Child with money in their mouth, baby doll for sale with comments saying it's overpriced, and other images portraying pizza in a sexual way. Jimmy Comet also posted a picture on his Instagram of Podesta's Arch of Hysteria sculpture. That's the apparently, I think that's the sculpture with the guy turned over on himself. Yeah, this thing. So that's weird. On when she visited his house, a picture of Satan and spirit cooking queen herself, Marina Abramovich, going back to the spirit cooking thing again. So that gets pulled back into it. His Instagram profile picture. This is what I find very disturbing. Okay, this one right here. His Instagram profile picture is a sculpture of Antinius, which resembles erotic love for adolescent boys. Antinius was the gay teenage lover of the Emperor Hadrian, and this is the guy's Instagram picture. Now, Alefantis is gay, whatever. But the fact that he's kind of celebrating a teenage lover of a Roman emperor is weird to me.
Have you heard the theory about his name?
What's the theory?
In French, his name means the love of children. J'aime les enfants.
Really?
Yep. Now, I don't know how far to read into that, but
see,
there's
another picture. And it's not that is from his Instagram that has two guys in boxer shorts, nothing but boxer shorts, and in the middle is this kind of like weird, skinny looking dude that has that name, Jamais L'Enfance, I love children, has that but in the context of the picture, it's extremely bizarre. Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I think that if anything in all this, like he's the most questionable.
Yeah. Comet Ping Pong using disturbing artwork with paintings of children with their heads cut off. And Thad is going to address some of this, I think, when we talk to him. And he'd give his viewpoint on it. And more artwork in their restaurant of heads cut off. And in their washroom, they have a painting of a guy playing ping pong while ejaculating on the table. Comet Ping Pong's friend for entertainment, Majestic Ape, which is an artist that has provocative music with artwork that involves both children and sex. Words, all the children with babies crawling and a child with a phallic toy in its mouth, joking of pedophilia in captions in their music videos. Is also listed on Comet Ping Pong's friends list. When giving a talk to her audience about preferences of an employee, someone shouts children and little boys, in which she responds, I think that was the manager. We all have our preferences. He. Comet Ping Pong and neighboring restaurants have a pedophilia symbol in their logos, a triangular spiral in the neighboring Besta Pizza, the butterfly, the heart. Now, I'm a little iffy on that one. I think that's, you see the symbols and they do look very similar, but also it could just be a symbol for pizza. Okay. I mean, honestly,
yeah.
It really could be. But then again, they talk about being hidden in plain sight. A noteworthy case is Ricky Dearman's children talking about their papa. This is something else. They're going into other things here. Okay, so some of the things that are on his Instagram account are, like I said, iffy. There was one that I saw that I thought nothing of. It was a picture of two little kids laying on a hammock, and you have a mom and a dad, and the dad is wearing a shirt that says in the corner, it says butt, B-U-T-T, and the woman is pointing at it and laughing, and somebody makes a comment, like maybe Alephantis himself says, like, daddy likes butt or something. But it's just people commenting weird things on Instagram.
Right.
I mean, everybody comments weird things. You get invited to weird things, like I said before. The chicken lovers thing, though, that to me is disturbing, with the pearls draped around the little girl. I can't tell if it's a little girl or a little boy. Some people said it's a boy. Some people said it's a girl. And then the hashtag chicken lovers, which is also slang for men who like little boys. That's disturbing. The little kid kind of taped to the ping pong table. I'm not as that just looks like a joke to me. But in the context of everything else, it's strange.
Yeah.
What I found most disturbing, though, was the fact that you have this pizza restaurant that has all this strange erotic art, and you have there was one picture that had these little girls, and they were having a sleepover, and it said hashtag sleepover, and they were all smiling, and they have sleepovers for little kids in this place, and you have all this weird art on the wall that is not appropriate for little children to see. I mean, I'll just come out and say it, call me a moralist if you want, but that's weird. And it really, when you look at this stuff, you just think, okay, some of it I can just see as people joking around. Maybe they just have it's one or two things. Maybe they have a really sick sense of humor. Are they actually doing this stuff?
Well, and that's my point, is if, maybe it is just joking around, but if there's enough of that to point to some underlying, like, not subconscious, but just,
yeah,
hidden side to this guy.
Yeah. I mean, I watched a documentary called Open Secret, and this was about pedophile rings in Hollywood, rather these guys that were getting these hopeful teenage boys, young teenage boys, but some of them as young as 11, and basically luring them into molestation, having sex with them. These guys that they had a company called Digital Entertainment Network, which went bust in the .com around like 2001 or so. And what they were trying to do is they were trying to do original programming for the internet, kind of like what Netflix is doing now. However, this was 15 years ago. But they talk about these guys and how these guys were basically luring these kids in, and they would have these parties in Hollywood. One of the associations that they had was Bryan Singer, who did the X-Men movies, Usual Suspects. I mean, he's done a lot of famous movies, fairly famous director. Okay. But apparently he was at these parties. One of these kids has brought a lawsuit. A couple of the guys later did get caught. One of the guys skipped the country. And these guys just have this very creepy vibe. They have this very creepy look to them. You know, like one of them has all this Botox surgery, and it's just, you have to see the documentary to really just, it creeps you out.
Ugh.
And Alephantis looks the same way to me. And it's almost like you look at it, and it's almost like you look at it, it's kind of like there's that little bit of an emotional thing there where it's almost like you got to use your intuition in a way and say something is not right here. Something is very strange. And then you have the Podestas and all their weird artwork and the pictures of little boys and the sculpture that Tony Podesta has that is which is in the form of how Jeffrey Dahmer used to pose his corpses. This weird homoerotic stuff, and just
a couple of things. The documentary that you mentioned, did they make any? I cannot remember the guy's name, but he's the director of Powder.
No,
it did not.
But
that guy is several times convicted a pedophile, and it is said that that from that documentary, Call Me Lucky, he says that is actually basically Powder. The script is the pedophile. It's like their manifesto. So
I've heard that too.
Yeah. And I mean, that guy is a convicted pedophile, but
right.
Man, I got to tell you, with all of this, I own several violent works of art. I have done album covers for people that were considered violent as well. If you look at some of my text messages, you would think, "Oh my God, there is something wrong with this guy."
Yeah,
I could be accused of all of this myself.
Yeah. In that respect, you are right, because there's plenty of weird stuff. Like Micah brought up the band Ghost. Mm-hmm. Apparently they say they worship Satan and all this, but probably actually don't. It's probably all gimmick, and we can see through that.
I know those guys, and I can assure you, it is quite the gimmick.
And most of the time, all that stuff is a gimmick.
Yes,
and that was the thing when I first looked at this, and I was like, okay, these are just people. They're picking stuff out of pepper. The people in Comet Ping Pong, they're working the restaurant business. I work in the restaurant business. I know how it is. I know how things can get when you're bored, and you talk about nasty stuff. It happens. Okay. Anybody who's worked in the restaurant business knows this, mm-hmm. especially when you're working in that kind of higher scale restaurant, a high stress area. But and so a lot of it I can look at and I can say, okay, that's just a joke. I can look at it and say that's just a joke. But then some of it, like I said before, when you have people you have this weird artwork, but you may have had that, but you're also not bringing children into the mix, and you're not having children that come in and have sleepovers. And plus all this weird code that's in these WikiLeaks emails. And look, I want to say this. I'm still 50-50 on this stuff. I'm still not sure. And the thing is, we're probably never going to be sure unless there is some kind of conviction. And right now, nobody is touching this thing with a 10-foot pole, but just people on the internet.
And that's my point right there, is that there's enough there that it's worth looking into, and that they shouldn't be calling it fake news unless there's going to be an investigation.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Has anyone brought this person up on charges?
No.
See,
Edgar Madison Welch with his rifle and his Rambo complex.
Yeah, and clearly he was...
yeah.
Thank God we had that guy protecting our kids.
Yeah. Nobody's brought any charges on this.
See,
we will see.
Yeah.
We will see.
If you were to say this guy's got a long list of accusations against him, I might be like, okay. I mean, look at Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
That guy, he had tunnels in his house.
Yeah.
I mean, it was clear.
Alarm systems.
Yes. Then how many people accused him of doing it? But yet, he had, if you go through his house and look at his wonderful art that he had, I'm doing air quotes because his tastes were awful. Mine are good. I am not a pervert, and his were awful. I'm kidding. But just to make you laugh. Anyway, so there you go. I think that when people try to put up that front, because my thing is, anytime somebody goes, "No, I'm a good guy. I'm a Christian," I instantly don't trust them. I know they're bad, and so therefore.
Yeah, it's really about what's in people's hearts,
right?
Honestly,
and so therefore, I would way rather I trust people that have a sixth sense of humor, that don't say I'm not a nice guy, or that do say I'm not a nice guy.
And I think that's where Thad is going to go with this too. I think that's where he's going to go with it, and probably give us a little bit of an insight into it, because there is another element to this, and that is the fact that while we have all this that is very strange and very bizarre, there is also a witch hunt element to this as well,
right?
To where people can easily get worked up and get the pitchforks or bring a rifle into the Comet Ping Pong and do this. One other thing I wanted to mention I thought was odd, and I saw this in a video last night. This could just be interesting. The picture of Baphomet, where you have one finger pointing down and one finger pointing up, and then you have these little like crescent moon shapes. In the Comet Ping Pong logo, there you have the same crescent moon shapes in the same position as in the Baphomet. I take that for what it is, man. I don't know what that is, but just take it for what it is. I don't know, but that was weird to me too. So I think on this one, guys, time will tell, and this could just be easily forgotten about, swept under the rug. Once Trump comes in as president, we'll see how much people are paying attention to this. Also, I found it interesting as far as Trump goes. Michael Flynn, who is on par to be the new national security advisor, his son actually posted about Pizzagate, and they actually fired Flynn's son. Trump actually fired him from the transition team because of his post about Pizzagate. So that could be a good sign that we're not going to listen to this
things like that
stuff.
happen, I tend to look a little harder. I just can't help it.
And the Reddit thing too, right?
Yeah,
them shutting it down on Reddit,
banning all conversation on Reddit.
Yeah, what their excuse was that they were going to have that they didn't want, and people were doing this. They were posting personal information of Alephantis and the address of the store and all this kind of stuff and personal stuff online. Now that was their excuse, but it's interesting how that got shut down. And see, that just in your mind, that gets your mind thinking like, well, maybe there is something to it. Are they scared about this?
It's just people talking. Talking is fine.
This is I know I am 100% don't believe any of this, and I'll tell you exactly why. The first thing that you read in there is, well, he has ties to Hillary Clinton. I know that it's made up because that's their little thing. Oh, yeah, it's to Hillary Clinton. There you go.
Well, let me say
it's
this.
It's a lie.
Let me say this. We said this before. This goes on both sides. Okay, this is both sides of the political aisle. These pedophile things, this stuff that goes on. And remember, as I said last time, Dennis Hastert, the former Speaker of the House, has been prosecuted has had charges brought up for him for molesting teenage boys in the 70s. Okay, this stuff has happened.
I think it happens. I think it happens more than we know.
And there was the Franklin cover-up that was on the Republican side. Okay, this was happening in the Reagan and the Bush White House. There was also a homosexual callboy ring in the Reagan White House.
Really?
Okay, so this stuff does not just happen from the side of the Democrats. It happens on the Republican side as well.
Right.
This is an elite thing. This is not a Democrat or somebody with a D or an R at the end of their name. Also, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, who is a convicted child predator and a child trafficker with his little island down there called Lolita Island that he used to bring Bill Clinton to. He also would
all kinds of upper.
He would also bring Donald Trump would hang out with him as well.
Yeah.
So
I'm
there's a
not saying
lot
it
of this.
doesn't happen.
So
I'm
there's
not
a lot
saying
of
it doesn't.
there's a lot of this weirdness.
I do not
But I
believe
get your point.
whenever the first couple of lines where it ties to Hillary Clinton.
Well, that's just somebody trying to grab it and use it for their own agenda, though.
Exactly. It's not true.
Well, the connection there might not be true, but there could be some truth in.
I can tell you. I mean, I can tell you a place you can go right now and pick up pimps, prostitutes, whatever, and nothing's going to happen. It's I can tell you exactly a place. Go to Murfreesboro Road, and you can do this all day long. But
Jeff is going to take some special listeners out there for a field trip. All right, guys,
and go do something about it. Become a crusader.
Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Good point. Good point. There are plenty of organizations that are out there that are against this stuff, and they are doing something about it. So find those in your community and do something about it. Human trafficking, child trafficking goes on all the time. And it's not just happening with little white kids in Washington, D.C. It's happening with kids of all races, all colors, everywhere. There was just a slavery ring that was busted in London. I mean, it's somewhere in England not too long ago. Okay. Right. So this stuff happens all the time.
Right, and there's very easy ways to get involved.
In your community right now. So don't go to Comet Ping Pong with a gun and worry about them. Worry about what's going on in your community.
But don't you think it is funny that nobody cares? I'm telling you, I'll give you a place you can go and break it up, but it doesn't matter to anybody unless it's politicized. That's the only reason anyone's going to care about it.
All right, well, we got to get to the guests, so we got 5 minutes, and we're going to call them. And guys, we will be right back with Walter Bosley to talk about his book, Shimmering Light. All right, guys, so we're back on Conspirinormal, and on the line we have one of our favorite guests on the show, on for a now, I think, record 4th time. That is, you've joined the 4 guest club, Mr. Bosley. That's Mr. Walter Bosley. We're going to talk about his book, Shimmering Light. But Walter, you know Rob here.
How's it going, Walter?
Hey, Rob.
And this is Jeff. He's one of our new co-hosts.
Hello, sir.
Hello. Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
I did not make the proper introductions as we had our little pre-show banter here, but it is what it is. You have a new book out that just, I think, is pretty hot off the presses, so to speak, right? At least hot off the e-reader.
yeah. I think just a little less than 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think right before Thanksgiving, I think is when you put it out, and that is called Shimmering Light, which has a very interesting subtitle. What is that subtitle?
I'm not looking at a copy of the book.
Lost in an MK Ultra House of Anu or Anu.
Lost in an MK Ultra House of Anu. And then I think the rest of the cover kind of gives it a little bit more, Operation Paperclip, Roswell, UFOs, and perception management.
Yeah. And You know, the first time we had you on, we talked about Empire of the Will. We talked about that series. And then the second time we talked about Secret Missions. The third time we talked about Origin, which is your book kind of about the origin of a possible breakaway civilization. But this book is, I think, a little more personal for you in that it deals with the story of your father. So let's talk about, to start off, what your dad's background was in the military. You know, where was he stationed? How long was he in? What branch of service was he in?
Well, in the mid-50s, he entered the United States Air Force, enlisted, and he spent his entire enlistment after basic training and getting his assignment. He spent his entire enlistment at George Air Force Base, which Southern California natives, over 40, I would say, are very familiar with George. It's up in Victorville. It, of course, has not been an Air Force base for a while, but physically it's still there. And my dad, during his enlistment, was a physiological training specialist. And essentially, he would run pilots through the altitude chamber. He would brief and train pilots on things to do with what flight, particularly at high altitude, would do to human physiology, what they could expect, what they would experience, what they should try to avoid. He would train them on the uses of the latest technology in pressure suits and oxygen delivery systems. He would help to maintain, provide the maintenance on this equipment for the various squadrons that used it on his base and in his area. I grew up, before the book The Right Stuff came out, I grew up hearing firsthand stories of men like Chuck Yeager, Ivan Kinchlow, Scott Crossfield, all these guys that Tom Wolfe wrote about in his book from the late 70s.
Yeah, we just lost John Glenn just the other day.
Yes, yes, we did. And, for my generation in particular, because I was a little kid when Apollo was happening, that's a big deal. I used to be able to, if put my mind to it, I probably could, but, I used to be able to just rattle off, anybody my age, any kid could rattle off the names of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts. And, I remember, watching the launches and the landings and the splashdowns and stuff, just grew up watching that. And my dad's unit tested what would be the Mercury spacesuit, the silver suit that you see in all the historical films and in the movie The Right Stuff. My dad's unit at George did the ground testing, because they always test this stuff in the altitude chambers. His unit did the ground testing for that specific suit when Mercury was an Air Force manned space program. Before NASA came along and took it over, Mercury was an Air Force
Yeah, see, I didn't actually know that. I thought that they had actually had started with NASA. So I guess that when did Mercury get started, just as an aside?
Honestly, formally, just less than a year before NASA came along.
Okay.
And then I think it had been around a year or so when NASA took over Mercury. However, as I lay out in the book, and I got to tell you, I didn't know the extent of what I had found in research for this book, that the Air Force had pursued manned space. I am even more. I have said ever since I, was in the Air Force, ever since I got out, I've told people, look, I'm convinced for reasons I can say and reasons I cannot. I tell people, look, U.S. Air Force, U.S. military, but particularly U.S. Air Force, probably has a classified manned space program to some degree. And after doing the research for this book, looking into my dad's era and what the Air Force was doing in post-World War II, I can tell you it's even more. It should be even more convincing because, General Benson, in my opinion, as I say in the book, was really pursuing that. And just because NASA came along and took over Mercury, I say this in the book, of course, as you know, I don't think that the Air Force just suddenly stopped pursuing manned space travel. I think it went classified at that point.
Yeah. I think that would tend to make sense in many ways. So when you really think about it, I want to ask you, Walter, about, you were in the Air Force as well. Did your dad's time in the Air Force, did that inspire you to join? And
those kind of influences are in the background, but actually, I had thought about it in the late 80s and then went the other direction, went FBI. But honestly, after working for the FBI for a while, my mentor, told me, okay, go talk to the military and go talk to them about, in intelligence or agent positions. And that's exactly what I did. And the Air Force was the one who bit the hardest because they liked my background for the FBI. And I was what you call direct accession into OSI. What that means is I knew exactly what I was going to be doing before I even reported to officer training school. Usually you go in, most guys and ladies go in, you go through officer training school, and somewhere around 2 weeks before you graduate, or a week perhaps, you find out what your duty assignment's going to be. You find out what your specialty, where you're going to be going, what your job's going to be. I knew from the day I reported that I was going to OSI. As a matter of fact, about a month before I reported to OTS, the man who would be my special agent in charge in Los Angeles called me on the phone and said, hey, do you want to come work for my detachment? I'd love to have you out here. So not only did I know that I was going to be an OSI agent, I knew exactly what my base assignment was going to be. And that was, because of the experience that I had. But it was really because I wanted to be a federal agent. And, my mentor said, hey, go apply there. Take that if they offer it to you. At the time, there was a hiring freeze in the FBI for agent positions. They would do that occasionally. They might still. But in other words, they were just not hiring any new agents. They weren't training any new agents, and my goal was to be a federal agent. And so that's why I jumped over to the Air Force and took and now when I was leaving the Air Force, I applied to be an agent, and I got accepted. I passed all the stuff in the FBI. I got a letter somewhere in my files. It's my you've been hired back provisionally. I think all I had to do was go do the physical, but they wanted me back as an agent, and I decided to take another offer. But it was good to know that they wanted me back, and were going to give me a badge. But no, it was of course, it was something I was enthused about doing. Being a military officer. I mean, I have that for life. A commission is for life unless you resign it or get it yanked away. So, I can say till I die that I'm a captain in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. That's pretty awesome. It is. It's, it's for people who respect that kind of thing. It's pretty cool. They can grab me back anytime until I'm, I think, 62. Yeah. So of course, you're not very popular with the UFO crowd because of your association with a FOSI. Yeah. Yeah, some of them are, utterly ridiculous with thinking that I'm some type of disinfo. And I might have said it here before, but I'll say it again. I wish, because that would imply a paycheck. Yeah. It was funny. I was watching Netflix one night, and this is as an aside here. I'm watching Netflix, and I turn on this movie called Mirage Men. And there you are in the movie, and I'm like, all pasty and fat with long stringy. I sitting in a lawn chair. I texted you on Facebook, and I was like, I'm watching Netflix, and you're on the movie I'm watching, and you're like, what are you watching? And I said Mirage Men, and you're like, oh yeah, that. I really love the movie, but I'm conflicted on it just because they threw you in with Richard Doty which you had absolutely nothing to do with any of that stuff. Right. I still to this day, I'll stand up for Doty to a great degree because, I've been inside his organization. I know how things work. And, personally, I've said it before. I've told Greg Bishop this. What was done to Benowitz, in my opinion, was not likely done by Doty. In my opinion, that was the hand of some other federal agency that came in on the whole thing. In my opinion, that was I can almost guarantee you that what happened with the whole Benowitz thing was not at the hands of the U.S. Air Force.
Interesting. That's an interesting perspective of it because we talked about that with Adam Gorightly back last year. He's actually writing a book about that, and we've not had Bishop on the show. I need to get him on, but let's get into the stuff in the book, man.
Sure.
I want to. When did your father get out of the Air Force, and what did your father tell you about the experience that he had, and what was your kind of reaction when you heard all this?
He got out. I have the document somewhere around here. It's not hands reach, but it's in the book, of course. In December of 1958, and he was released early to go to school. Is the reason they used. I discuss in the book that it might have involved other reasons. Now he had an honorable discharge. He received an honorable discharge, so I like to make sure that's clear. The earliest I can recall, like I say in the book, was around 1974 that he first started talking about this. And it was a Sunday. We were still living in West Virginia. 74. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 74. And we were looking at some of the classic Life and Look magazines on UFOs that had come out during the 60s. UFO buffs will be very familiar with those. And that got us talking about, as a little kid, I was only not quite 11 years old, but it got him talking about the subject in general. And as the mid 70s progressed, the following year returned to California. But as the mid 70s progressed, there were more and more shows about UFOs on television and stuff, and of course that would inspire a conversation. And he would tell the story about how when he had been at Gunter Air Force Base in Alabama for some training. At one point, he and a couple other guys had to fly to one of the bases in Texas for some, what would be considered routine briefings and stuff. And when the plane got over about Louisiana or Mississippi, it made a northward banking turn, and an intel officer comes out of the forward cabin and informs them that they're not going to Texas, that they're on their way to Ohio, specifically Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it's there that my dad told me that they were briefed on this incident that happened near Roswell, New Mexico in the late 40s, in 1947 specifically. And they were shown bodies and debris. And then they were told that it had happened again in Arizona. And the next thing he would say about it was, off they went to Arizona, and they were in this subterranean area. There was an Air Force search and rescue operation that was going on, classified, and it was at the request of the people whose craft had crashed. And he described these people as this is my word, parallel human civilization on the planet. And their craft had gone down, and he didn't give me the specifics, but they had come to our authorities or whoever, presumably a base, and asked for help in locating their pilot so that he could be returned to home, which was in the subterranean world. No other way to put it. And in this project, my dad and a couple of guys had an unexpected encounter with some of the underground folks, which resulted in they kind of startled each other. They kind of walked up on each other, and one of the U.S. Air Force guys ended up being killed. And that's pretty much where his story would end, as he told it. And so I had heard this story over the course of a few decades. And, I'd written one article on it a few years back, but I had never really dived into it, even with, a source of many years telling me a little bit more and having me draw a little bit more out of my dad. This book was really the first time I really jumped in to analyze everything I knew and anything I could find relative to it.
What was your reaction when he told you this? I mean, what did you think about this story?
Well, I'm first hearing it when I'm a kid, and of course it's fascinating me.
Sure.
Because I was really fascinated with UFOs, and, it wasn't Jaws, it was Close Encounters that made me think, wow, this Spielberg guy's got the coolest job in the world. I want to be a movie director.
Yeah.
And so I was fascinated with movies, and we've talked about that in the past, but I was just as equally fascinated with the subject matter of Close Encounters. Interestingly enough, E.T. does not do anything for me. E.T.'s a bunch of sentimental dreck, in my opinion. I like Close Encounters because it pushes my buttons, even though it has the touch of the sentimental stuff. So that would inspire conversations. And because I was so into this, I mean, my dad telling me this story, I'm thinking, this is awesome stuff. This is cool. And then as I got older and learned more weird stuff, on the course of my own life, it just became even more fascinating. And then naturally, when my mentor started, kind of confirming to me when I would, as I say in the book, it's like, hey, my dad, he's under sedation, and boy, the stuff he's talking about, and I got my mentor telling me, oh, he's talking about that, is he? Okay, well, don't let him talk about that around other people, but when you're with him, try to draw more out. And then, over the years, he would fill in blanks. Now, this is after I had, I was in the Air Force, and I had the clearance level that I have. He shared, more of this with me, and told me to drag it out of my dad a little bit more. And, that's what I tried to do as much as possible before my dad died. It just really, all my life hearing about this, it always fascinated me.
So as you would hear this story, I mean, did he add more details as time went on? Especially as he, I guess he was this kind of like as he was dying that a lot more of this stuff would come out?
Yeah, he would. He would, as time went on, and especially as by the time I started working him, I was an agent. I was an investigator, and I would apply interrogation, soft interrogation skills on him. The things I know where you just have what appears to be a casual conversation with someone, and what you're actually doing is you're interrogating them, and they don't realize it. Yeah. I do it to family members all the time, particularly if I think they're lying to me about something, and they hate it because it always works. I can't tell you how many times I've pissed my mom and one of my sisters off.
Could you share with us some of your techniques?
No. And but here's the thing I want to emphasize. One of the clues that somebody's making stuff up or lying is that stuff they've told you in the past changes. Okay?
Sure.
Nothing that he had ever told me up to whatever point he was, maybe telling me additional, nothing that had been told before ever changed. It stayed consistent. And remember, as he was telling me more, was as many, many years had passed since they had used the hypnosis to suppress this. And after a while, that does break down. Okay. And then when you add on it the interrogation techniques that I'm using and jogging his memory, and the fact that I'm his son, there's that level of trust where,
sure,
he knows I'm interested in this. If he's going to share it with anybody, who else, So you combine all of that, and of course there's going to be more revealed, but I want to emphasize that nothing had changed that had been told already. And that is significant.
Yeah, and to him, this story was 100% real.
Oh yeah,
yeah. He was not lying. Yeah.
I was convinced long ago and remain so that of course, I present the possibility that could be a planted narrative, but to him, this really happened.
So, as you're doing the research on this, you decide to start doing research, looking into this bizarre story, and trying to corroborate it. What did you find that you could say that you could pinpoint him to these places that he was in?
Oh, well, the beauty is, number one, his DD-214 proves that he was at Gunter, for example, twice, as a matter of fact, and at the right time that certain things, were going on. And the fact that, again, his DD-214, his discharge paper, shows that he was indeed physiological training specialist and that he did indeed get this kind of training and that he was involved in aviation medicine, as they call it. There you go. It's on his DD-214 and that little form that I talk about in the book that I found in his papers that was a base-generated form, a George Air Force Base Form 101, which told, even more corroborating data to his story. And I would say those two documents are very important to this whole thing. But when I looked at the history of the Air Force at the time and leading up to it and since, and of course, coming from the filter of being an Air Force officer and having been an insider, it just became even more convincing that there was something to his story, whether it's a planted narrative or the truth. All these things just really astonished me, even with my background, the degree to which I can say, hey, there's something. This is not just, there's something going on here. This is not just, some guy making up stuff out of his imagination to entertain his kid. I mean, even if it did turn out to just be MK Ultra, planted narrative, fake cover story. Wow. First of all, what a cover story they chose. If that's the case, what the hell? And if they went to all this trouble, what the hell were they covering up? See, so what it was just a win-win for me. Because again, even if you could just dismiss the wild underground story of the parallel civilization people, you got to ask yourself, what the hell were they covering up? And boy, the history shows that it sure does look like a secret space program.
Could you place him in Arizona?
Specifically through documentation? No, but I want to say this. I have yet to receive, I had to come out with the book, but I've yet to receive his personnel record, his full Air Force personnel record. And in that, I could possibly, I probably would find documented evidence to prove that he was in Arizona and when. So that was disappointing to not get that file before I came out with the book. But when I get that file, I look through there. If I don't find any evidence, believe me, I'll be the first to say it. But boy, if I do find it, that'll be even more corroboration. What I do find interesting is that in his story, in his testimony, he had said Eastern Arizona, and he said in the vicinity of Winslow, and that's what led me to Holbrook, which is that town in that area I talk about. And lo and behold, we have some interesting Air Force stuff going on right there in Holbrook. So though I could not find the records, the documentation to prove or disprove the Arizona part, there's some very good circumstantial and testimonial evidence to back that up.
What was going on at that Air Force base in Holbrook?
Well, Holbrook is a small station associated with radar, And in fact, there's a U.S. Air Force radar site there. I talk about that in the book. Holbrook remains on the list of Air Force installations that have access to what's called Space A, or space available flights. Anybody who's been in the military knows what Space A is. Basically, like when I was on terminal leave, leaving Air Force active duty, I spent 30 days in Europe. Well, on my flight over there, I got what's called a Space A seat. All I had to do was pay $12 tax, processing fee, and I got to fly as a active duty service member. I got to fly, for $12 on a really nice airplane. It was a civilian airplane. They usually use military craft, but they have a contract arrangement with civilian airlines as well.
Sure.
And that's what I took to Europe and back. Well, that's what Space A is. Like if you're on your own time, and let's say you're moving your family, you and your family can fly on a U.S. Air Force Space A flight. Or even if you're on a duty situation, sometimes you could use a Space A. But that's what it is. It's kind of like the airline service of the Air Force or the military.
Okay. Yeah, I think my stepson used something pretty similar to that, being in the Navy. So to get him to Japan.
And to finish that, I don't think I finished the thought. Basically, what it means is if whatever the Air Force has at Holbrook, the personnel there, if they need to take one of these flights, they can request, either a plane to pick them up, or they get Air Force transportation to the nearest Air Force base because they're on the roster or whatever, the list of bases that have this available to them. That's what I mean.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about this concept here about the.
Well, can I interrupt?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no problem.
And the listener's probably saying, well, why is that significant to what you're talking about? The fact that today Holbrook is listed on the Space A list, that indicates that there is something Air Force going on there.
Gotcha.
That's the ultimate point with that.
I see. So it could not just be the Space A place. There could be something else happening there.
Well, what it means is there is indeed something Air Force going on there officially, which is why it even shows up. Like there's nothing Air Force in Yucaipa, California. So Yucaipa, California is not on the Space A list. See the point?
Gotcha. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Let's talk about this idea of an underground civilization, because in some ways this goes back to your Secret Missions 2 book, talking about this idea of Richard Burton and looking at underground civilizations possibly in the South America. So here's a corresponding theme to one of your previous books into this book and your father's story. So what are some of the proofs that you kind of lay out in the book about a possible subterranean civilization specifically in that area?
Well, first of all, thank you for mentioning the Burton book. That's I think that's actually my personal favorite of all my nonfiction books, oddly enough. I just enjoyed writing that, and I love when people bring it up. But yes, there is. I think in this book, Shimmering Light, I present more evidence that you can point to that the Air Force, the Department of Defense, whatever government, has been doing underground construction. I think the evidence and argument for that I present in the book is a probably a stronger case for most people. But yes, I do go into the folkloric and the legendary aspects of the local cultures that have for centuries talked about and believe that there is this underground civilization it's of course all over the world, but from their perspective in the American Southwest. And some of the description that they give that's in their lore and mythology is darn near exactly, in some cases exactly, what my dad described in this encounter with these underground people. And so even though I don't have a photograph of one of these people, or I can't give you a map to go where their underground cities are, what we've got is this this historical literature that talks about this in this specific area, and then you have this modern account. Now, the only way that you could totally dismiss it would be if my dad indeed, was a big fan of Native American lore and had read this specific stuff and decided, hey, I'll just throw that in on the story. That'll sound good. Nothing I know about my dad or growing up, none of the books that I ever saw him read or look at or that we had around the house indicates that he was even aware of the old Paiute legends of the Havmasuvs. There's this civilization I talk about in the book. The Paiutes called them the Havmasuvs, and they were this mysterious civilization that had what they called flying canoes, and they had this tube that the best way they could describe it was that they thought that it shot cactus needles, because if this tube was engaged and pointed at you, there would be this prickly pain and it would stun you and paralyze you. What's interesting about that is not only is that almost exactly what my dad describes in The Underground Encounter, but in the following decade, in the 1960s, in Nebraska, I believe it is, there was a UFO encounter with occupants of the vehicle, and they used the same exact thing. It was a rod. They pointed it at one of the witnesses, and that witness was paralyzed.
Interesting.
So, and Jacques Vallée talks about this in a couple of his books. So it's not documentable or verifiable or photographic evidence of any of this, but it's interesting that it has been there for centuries in the lore, and that 5 or 6 years or so later, there was another very similar incident, in the Midwestern United States.
What was the description? How would your dad describe these beings? Because he didn't really describe them as like the classic gray aliens, right? As you normally see laying around, I guess, in the UFO museum in Roswell.
Right. I just went there earlier this year.
Oh, did you really?
For the first time. I'd never been to Roswell. But he insisted when he talked about what he saw of the Roswell occupants and what he was briefed in on with the Arizona situation. He always insisted that they were human. And whenever he'd see the reports and the stories and the claims that they're these gray aliens with these big round head, and blah, 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 so forth, what we're all used to, he would just shake his head and say, no, that is not what they were. Yeah. They were as human as we are, with little to no body hair. That's what he said. That was different, than us. But he said that, and the ones that they had the encounter in which the other Air Force guy was killed. They were humans, but he said that they were essentially blind, but their other senses were superior. That's how they could live in the underground world. Now, here's what's interesting is that, the people who had lost the craft, both in Roswell and in 1958, the situation he was involved in, they were a civilization that had gone underground thousands of years before because of a surface cataclysm on the planet, and they had this advanced technology and such. But this group that he encountered could have been who the Cherokees used to call the moon-eyed people. And that was, again, humans that had also gone underground during this cataclysm. And after all this time being under there, they became blind. As they adapted to the subterranean world. And these moon-eyed people of the Cherokee legends and reports, Thomas Jefferson talks about this in one of his books, that it was reported during the colonial era.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
So
You also talk about and we've actually talked about this with Joshua Cutchin. We talked about the guy in Wisconsin who had the 3 aliens come to his house and make him pancakes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean Joe Simonton?
Yeah, Joe Simonton. Yes.
Yeah, and the Air Force analyzed those pancakes and found that they were just buckwheat pancakes. What they did not have was salt.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is it's talked about in folklore, particularly fairy lore, that they don't eat salt.
Mm-hmm.
And in the fairy lore, this what's called the secret commonwealth have lived among us, parallel, so to speak, for a very long time, and they don't eat salt either.
Another story this makes me think of. Are you familiar of the story of the blue children or the green children?
Yes, the green children.
The green children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the story of the in like medieval England, where they apparently were found, and they were said that they lived in an underground world that was lit by some kind of. It was like a perpetual twilight in their world, is what they said. And the boy died, and the girl later lived, and she learned English and became a member of the society, basically. But they never returned.
Lost her green skin tone.
So there's some parallels there with that as well. I thought that was interesting.
Sure. And to bring it back, you mentioned the Burton book, and in my Burton book, I talk about, it's my theory that those months that he disappeared, particularly the 4-month period where there's nothing publicly recorded or revealed about, I say that he was looking for some of these ancient lost cities that following him, Colonel Fawcett would look for, and I think find, and of course get lost famously. Returning to, Burton was finding some of the remnants of this civilization. I think that we're talking about here that went underground, and of course, the Burton book gets into the stories of the ancient tunnels in South America and such. So that's the tie into that.
Well, it's interesting how in the UFO lore we have this period from the 40s to the 50s to the 60s, and really the grays begin to kind of take over in the 70s, where you have primarily these humanoid encounters with people that look very similar to us but are somehow different. And this fits in very well with that in many ways.
You mean my dad's story?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would say the grays really didn't take hold until the 80s.
Right.
But, late 70s, particularly thanks to Spielberg's film. That really planted that image in people's minds. And an interesting thing there, in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, he comes out with that and plants that image in people's minds. And, suddenly that's all people ever see. So you have to acknowledge that that film might have influenced, reports and how people, people's assumptions as to who these beings are. Not to say that they don't exist, but
sure. And missing time and communion and all these things go into it as well. Let's talk about Roswell, because your dad does mention Roswell, and he mentions that as a starting off point of this story. So I'd like to know, you're very critical about Roswell. I am too, in many ways, because I, as time has gone on, I've looked at it and thought that a lot of it is based on some eyewitness testimony that is remembered 40 years after the event. So let's talk about some of that, kind of like your feelings on what you think happened, may have happened, or not have happened.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm critical of the assumption that the ET hypothesis is the answer. That right there is what I'm critical of. I do think
we are as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think something happened that was not weather balloon or a classified balloon program related. I didn't buy that. I've never bought that. I think that, of course, that was going on, and of course those things, were coming down, but that, of course, doesn't explain what we call the Roswell incident. As I say in the book, I think it is just as possible that what was happening was an early, very classified U.S. military attempt to put man in space. And it either remains classified to this day because it's tied in with what became a secret space program that they don't want to reveal, or because it was not technically authorized as such. In other words, and I lay this out in the book, in other words, they had the authorization to do, research on aviation medicine. Under aviation medicine, they had the authorization to research the effects of high altitude flight on human physiology. They had the authorization to build, these V2s and other, rockets, right? And what I mean by not having authorization as such, it might be that they didn't exactly have the authorization to marry up aviation medicine and those rockets and actually put human beings in one of those rockets and shoot them up into space. But let me put it to this way. In the culture, at least I can speak for the Air Force, one of the big things they hammer into you from the time you start at officer training school is they tell you officers take risks. Okay, they expect you as an officer to have some balls about you. And I had a commander once tell me, the first person to ever tell me this. He said, Walter, it's a lot easier to ask forgiveness than it is permission. And so my personal opinion as an officer, I know I'm just a lowly captain, is I could totally see a guy like Curtis LeMay and Otis Benson, saying, hey, we got permission for the aviation medicine. We got permission for the rockets. Let's put a guy in one of these rockets. Let's do it. And I could see a guy like Curtis LeMay, who was the Air Force Chief of Staff at the time, chomping on his cigar and saying, "You go for it, Otis. I'll answer above. You do it. Go for it. Proceed." And that could have been what crashed at Roswell.
Do you think it was just possibility of a lawsuit kind of thing, or the possibility that they didn't want the Soviets to know what we were working on, or also the fact that we had Nazi scientists helping us work on it?
Well, the first thing, like a lawsuit, no chance of that. It was right after World War II. U.S. Army, Air Force, U.S. Air Force could do no wrong. And honestly, the citizenry, if they were to find out that these guys had done this, I mean, they'd be hailed as heroes. It'd be like, all right, it's too bad they lost the guys, but by God, that's what we want our Air Force doing. Stuff like that. So back then, it would be, I would say, it would be a concern of. You're probably assuming that the Russians are going to try the same thing because they had Nazi rocket scientists too. But you just don't want them to know exactly what you're trying or what you're doing. The fact that we had the Nazi scientists, that really didn't start becoming an issue with the public until the 50s. And it was in the 50s that it really started to embarrass the Air Force when it was uncovered by some very good journalists at the time. That some of these guys had indeed been involved with nefarious stuff. And in some cases, the Air Force knew it. And in other cases, they did not. And so there might have been a little bit of that. But at the time they would have done it, this was 1947, I don't think that would have been the concern. I think probably the Russians would have been, the bigger concern. So...
Sure.
That.
Yeah. I mean, that does make sense. It's just interesting that we would still 70 years later be covering that up.
Well, yeah. And what does that imply? That implies what the heck happened actually.
Yeah.
What the heck did they see and find out? Right. If now remember, this is all hypothetical. If this were the case, there must have been something that happened in that attempt, something that happened in that flight that was so game changing, so vital, that they probably turned around and started doing it again. And one thing led to another, and there they have a true classified manned space travel program.
Mm-hmm.
And, now let's not forget, this was just, in the decade after the major world war, right? And there is military power and strength in secrecy. That's why we classify our military technology. A lot of it is because you want it to be that surprise that you pull out of your toolbox in a time of war. So, really, there may not be anything sinister or mysterious about why they would keep it secret. They would have viewed it as the military high ground.
Yeah.
The soonest we can put man in space, we've got the high ground. So it could just be a very logical reason for keeping it secret.
I've been thinking along these lines lately about, the whole idea that they put out the flying disc story. And I have to wonder if that was an original cover story. And then someone said, no, you can't use that. You're going to make people think that aliens are coming. There's going to be another War of the Worlds.
Could be.
And then they came out, then they said, oh, sorry. No, it was a weather balloon, as if, but the flying disc story could have just been a cover story, and it was just a big public relations mistake.
Yeah. And I honestly, I didn't go deep into an analysis of that. It's just kind of there in the milieu, and it does leave those very questions. What the heck was that about? What was it a cover story for? Was it a cover story? Any number of things. But I emphasize that just because that story exists does not therefore make some leap in logic that it proves the ET hypothesis, which a lot of times that's used. Oh, see, they said it was a disc, therefore ET. No.
I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens.
Because look, exactly. My proposal here that it could have been, classified, U.S. Army Air Corps, U.S. Air Force Secret Space Program, first manned attempt. It could also have been what Joseph Farrell suggests, some type of Nazi issue, post-war Nazi issue. Okay. It could have been that. It could have been, something that, as far as the public was concerned, had been vanquished and conquered and should not be, and was therefore embarrassing. Right. And so that could be it. I would say that, I just think there's a lot more to suggest that it was something not the ET hypothesis than it was the ET hypothesis. And because of the total breakdown of the whole, Roswell Foundation, with so many witnesses having turned out to, kind of be flaky or misremembering or, flat out lying or whatever. Really, right now, the ET hypothesis, where Roswell is concerned, is kind of a pile of horse crap. Until they get more and kind of start fresh. That's where it is.
Yeah.
So, folks, Roswell's up for grabs.
You have some interesting insights onto Philip Corso about his book Day After Roswell, which has normally been looked at to say that, hey, there's the proof right there. This guy spilled the beans. He admitted that all of our technology, fiber optics, everything, night vision, all comes from the aliens. And you have some interesting thoughts on him.
Well, it's, and I know some people, the ET folks, the UFO folks hate when you bring up people like Carl Flock or Phil Klass and stuff, but, too bad. Flock, dug up some interesting stuff about Corso's credibility. But like I say, indicate in the book, that doesn't necessarily mean that Colonel Corso, wasn't, wasn't telling the truth, in certain aspects, or that, as I suggest, he might have been part of a perception management operation where Roswell is concerned. When I look at that situation, I see that possibility in there. And so I don't completely dismiss Corso. I do recognize where he might have been full of crap. I do recognize, some of the inconsistencies in what he said about his career and background and what the historical facts are. That might right there. The questionable things you can raise about the man himself could very well be part of the whole perception management operation that I suggest. Because what you want to do is you want to mess. If you're trying to mess with Roswell, if you're trying to keep people off track, if you're wanting to put a particular meme of that to bed to just finally stamp it out and kill it, you might do stuff like present a so-called source that kind of gives a nugget to the ET hypothesis. People say, aha, see, we're right. But then you want to kind of have just enough mud on the source so that, most other people will say, well, you can't trust the nuggets of gold he gave you because, look, he's questionable. And what that does is that puts things into enough of a tizzy and an off-kilter spin that it can bring the whole thing crashing down. And think about it. Since Corso, the whole, Roswell as an ET incident thing has really, since Corso, that really started it to careen out of control and go into the ditch.
Interesting thought. I think for you, it's you look at this from the point of an intelligence officer, and you can see these patterns, you can see these trends.
I was a counterintelligence agent. An intelligence officer is a different thing, but yes,
I gotcha. But you understand the techniques, is what I'm getting.
Oh
at.
yeah, because I've worked in perception management stuff. I ran counterespionage operations for a couple of years and was involved in them, of course, and worked in counterintelligence. The one consistency in my career is, about almost 20 years between being a specialist for the FBI, being an Air Force officer and an OSI agent, and then being in counterterrorism, and then doing background investigations for the OPM, Office of Personnel Management. I spent my first 12 years every day, practically, on counterintelligence operations to one degree or another. And then even in my counterterrorism days, I was still operating, using counterintelligence, counterespionage, intel, operational, stuff. That's my perspective. And, I see a lot of counterespionage, counterintelligence, perception management potential in the whole Corso situation as applied to Roswell. Right. So it makes sense to me from that perspective.
Let's talk about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and its role in your father's story. And then also this mysterious figure named Wilson pops up.
Yes. Yeah. So what about Wright-Pat? What do you want to know?
Well, what was the role of that in your father's story?
Oh, very important, because Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is where Air Force aviation medicine, aerospace, medical science, that's where it grew. That's where it was nurtured. That's the lab in which first Colonel Harry Armstrong and then General Benson created this thing. And it played a direct role in my dad's specialty, in that the medical science aspect and the technology supporting that, both flight operations and research into flight medicine, this stuff all grew out of Wright-Pat. And as I stated in the book, at various points in my dad's time in the Air Force, he would have had to gone to Wright-Patterson because if for no other reason, the equipment that I described earlier that was part of his job, the maintenance of it and the training, pilots on how to use it. This equipment was the oversight for that, and its origins and design and such was right there at Wright-Patterson at the Air Force labs there. And so my dad claiming in his story to have to go to Wright-Pat, that makes perfect sense within the context of both his story and his documented specialty. A lot of, the cool stuff that the Air Force does, starts on a drawing board, right there at Wright-Patterson. I was there for 3 years myself. So
I have a friend that was a civilian. He worked with the Air Force, but a civilian scientist, Dr. Future, he used to work over there as well. So,
I loved it. When I first got the assignment, I was in LA. They said, look, we want to bring you into counter-espionage operations. You got a choice. We can either bring you to headquarters, and you can run an ops desk, or you can be the branch chief of operations at Wright-Patterson. And at first I thought, Ohio. I had lived in West Virginia when I was a kid, and I'm like, Ohio, okay. But then the thing was a desk job, and a desk job means I would be the head of the desk of operations for a particular, the Russians or whatever. It's a cool job. It's not like just a desk job. We just use the term desk. Or gosh, I'd be chief of the operations branch, which is much sexier. So I took the Wright-Patterson assignment, right? And I have to tell you, my time at Wright-Patterson were three of the best years of my life. I lived right there in Fairborn, just, like a half a mile from my building, just inside one of the gates. And I loved that area. It ended up being, more cosmopolitan than I thought. And that's because, of the people that work the base. And I loved it. It really, I mean that. It was 3 of the best years of my life when I was there at Wright-Patterson living in Fairborn. The base is a very interesting place. And of course the history there. And it was a great experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So who was this mysterious Wilson character?
Wilson.
You touch on this, I think, in Origin and Empire of the Will too, I believe.
Well, I more than touch on it in in Origin and Empire. Wilson, my gosh, that's a subject for a show himself. Wilson is this mysterious figure at the center of my dad's story, and as I subsequently learned, at the heart of the whole airship mystery, dating back to the Sonora Aero Club of California in the 1850s and throughout the airship mystery of the 1890s. And then, of course, what my dad told me, his encounter with a Wilson. Of course, we're not talking about the same man in that span of time, but in the Sonora Aero Club, which if the listener is interested, they can go to my book, Origin. This was a group of interesting fellows who were allegedly building what essentially was anti-gravity flying contraptions in California in the 1850s, the decade before the Civil War. There was a man named Wilson in that group. And then in the 1890s, 40 years later, you had 2 men named Wilson who reportedly were members of the crew of one of these mysterious airships, and they were encountered more than once. And then you have the Wilson that my dad encountered in this, and what he was in my dad's story, he was the guy who was running the search and rescue operation, the man who was in charge of what was going on underground, according to my dad. And I never got an answer on whether he happened to also be an Air Force officer, or if he was just like a civilian scientist, who the operation reported to, that, oversaw the search and rescue and any technology transfer that was going on. But he was described to me by my mentor, the Wilson my dad encountered, as the most brilliant man alive who you've never heard of. And this was in the 1990s. And in 2004, when I first told this story to Joseph Farrell, the weekend that we met at one of David Childress's conferences in Illinois, I had asked him if he'd ever heard of Wilson. It was one of those late night conversations. It was me and him and Dorothy Murdoch, who passed away in the last year or so, and she wrote under the name Acharya. Anyway, it was us three, and when I asked him, have you heard of this Wilson character? He got that look on his face like, oh, we must speak of him in hushed whispers. And of course, we got a good laugh about this. But Wilson is this figure that, through the 80s and 90s, if you had looked at certain things, this Wilson guy would pop up. And the only public mention that I was aware of this mysterious Wilson in our times through the 80s and 90s was in W. Harbison's book Genesis, where he's got this Wilson character who fits the description of this genius scientist. Now, he has Wilson kind of as a villain who's working with the Nazis and stuff. My understanding of the particular Wilson in my dad's story that my mentor told me about was not affiliated with the Nazis and would not have been. But, the Harbison novel is that. It's a novel. It's fiction. But what's interesting about that is when you look at Harbison's novel, he was clearly hearing some of this same stuff about Wilson. He was clearly, a student of the airship mystery, which certainly, was in print to some degree at that time, of course. So it makes it all the more interesting. Who is this guy? But he's kind of like this Wizard of Oz at the center of it, and is probably this Wilson I'm talking about that my dad encountered probably is a descendant, in my opinion, of the 1890s airship Wilsons, who are relatives to the 1850s Sonora Aero Club Wilson. So you've got this family, with this knowledge of these things, these bizarre things that they pop up in the heart of all this.
Seems interesting that you have this family and that they're doing all these amazing things, but yet they are so secretive and they're not going to take any credit for this stuff or get any kind of accolades or recognition from the general public. I guess you have to be so devoted to it, I suppose, or believe in maintaining that secrecy. Are there some other motive there?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Not just some other motive. Certainly there's another motive there, but there's another reward.
Yeah.
Okay. Look. There's a quote that is attributed to Marco Polo, in which, and I don't know if this has been disproven on Snopes or if it can be attributed to, but allegedly Marco Polo said before he died that he had not written about half of what he'd seen and heard. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of do that myself. My books do not – people ask me sometimes, Walter, how can you be so confident about some of these things you write and say in your books and in your interviews? Mm-hmm. That confidence comes from – things I do not put in the books and will not talk about publicly. And the reward in that is, to me, gnosis is way more valuable than being popular. I could tell certain stories, personal experiences, and I would be invited to, conferences, and I could get up there and people would go, ooh, ah, and they'd want to hang out and, have lunch with me and they would, probably inspire me to, spin a certain web around, this stuff and exaggerate it and blah, blah, blah. And then, that would be a lot of fun for 5 or 6 years. I might even make a buck. But then after that, it would dry up because, it would just dry up because those who have gone down a certain road, there's an element of keep your mouth shut and you'll learn more. There's this old thing. It's called the admonition of Isis. and that is tell no one. When ISIS lifts her veil and shows you her true nature, shows you more of reality than you knew that was there, that's a gift. And it's not meant for you to go blabbing it. And, because here's the thing, every individual can get out there and find and see that truth for themselves. But this is what the gatekeepers, this is all they ask of you, is that you seek it yourself. Don't expect others to spill it all in a book so that you can sit there, read it in a book, and not do any of the work to learn these things. Because here's the interesting thing. I could share certain things, and you can read it in a book, words on a page, or you can hear me talk about it. But here's the interesting thing. When you go out and dig this out and experience this information, these situations yourself, there comes another dimensional quality that only the experiencer can experience, can see. And that's why, I say I'm not just going to put something in a book for someone to just sit there and read and they didn't have to do the work, because they're not going to get out of it what they could get out of it by seeking themselves. Now, there's some people that are just going to say, oh, that's a bunch of BS, I'm not going to bother with that. Great. I love those people because they're out of the way. I love someone who just is dismissive and skeptical, because then I don't have to deal with them.
We're getting philosophical here on this one. This is cool. Yeah. This is cool. Well, let's get back to your dad's story. Sure. So we have these elements. So we have possible underground civilization. We have this connection to a possible Air Force space program. And then you look at it and you say, wait a minute, there could be a connection to possible MK Ultra as well. So what's the role? What is the role there that you think? And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but what's the role?
Well, here's what I found that really was astonishing to me, because I didn't know this. The Operation Paperclip and the U.S. military, and particularly the U.S. Army Air Force and what became the U.S. Air Force, were very interested in and very instrumental in the things developed under MK Ultra. I didn't know this. The Air Force really dug this stuff. And so much so that you go to any of the sources I use in my book, they'll tell you, it's in the records, that the Air Force was the branch that most enthusiastically started their own MK Ultra projects, so to speak. And guess what? Congress found out what the CIA was doing with that stuff. They never dug into what the Air Force had been doing with it. So with that...
Yeah, because the CIA is supposed to be a quote-unquote civilian organization.
Well, yeah, but the military is supposed to answer to the civilians too.
True.
But here's the thing. With all that history there that I learned for the first time, the Air Force's hands in MK Ultra, I realized, oh, wait a minute. My mentor told me in the 90s that my dad had been hypnotized to suppress what happened in Arizona. Okay? And then I learned, almost 20 years later, that indeed hypnosis was the big thing under MK Ultra that they were trying to develop and use and do all these things with, both good and nefarious. And so there you have it. The history corroborates what my mentor told me they had done to my dad. So what that did was that opened up the whole possibility that there was a planted narrative, because they were doing things like that and trying to make a hypnotically operated assassin out of people. One of the things they toyed with was planting false memories and things, identity type stuff. Mm-hmm. So there you go. The fact that they were working with that makes it necessary to recognize that the story my dad believed was true and told could have been a planted narrative. But that still keeps the whole thing interesting, because if they were going to the lengths to come up with this wild story that my dad told to cover for something, I ask, wow, what the heck were they covering? It must have been, something big. And I don't think just the missile program was it.
Right.
There had to be something else, because as I argue in the book, people would say, well, Walter, all this underground stuff going on, of course it was the missile program. Well, they don't put men, pilots and astronauts, on ICBMs, okay? Why was the Air Force so deeply involved in really what was space medicine, if all of this was about missile silos? And because of my dad's specialty, he would not have been sent to Arizona to support either the construction of or the operations of ICBMs. He was physiological aviation medicine. Yep. Anything my dad did had to do directly with men, in aircraft or spacecraft. Okay?
Very good point there. Very good point. One thing to add to the Air Force's mind control, I don't know if you've read the book Left at East Gate by Peter Robbins. We've had Peter on the show. He talks about his co-author, Larry Warren, who witnessed the Rendlesham incident.
Right.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And their claim in that book is that similar things, hypnosis, implanted memories, were done to those guys, including Larry Warren, that witnessed the Rendlesham case. Okay? Right. And so when you're talking about that in the book, I automatically went to that in my mind thinking, okay, there's something to this. These two things have something to do with one another. So the interest in an Air Force program of mind control would serve. It seems like whatever could have happened to your dad possibly happened to these guys as well.
Right. And I want to throw in here too, and I say this in the book, I don't see if this hypnotic suppression was used, if a planted narrative was used, I don't see this as some bad, evil thing the Air Force did to my dad. I don't think my dad looked at it that way. Because from the perspective, if he was involved in some type of project, I know how the Air Force works. Yeah. They probably told him up front, look, when you're done with this is what we're going to do. It's just part of the security of the operation, OPSEC. And I know my dad, he would have said, okay, he would have saluted smartly and gone about his business and laid down on the couch and let them plant that narrative and do their thing. I probably would have done the same thing because the spirit of it was that it was probably something so important, and this is what they were trying in those days, to secure OPSEC. Now, I would say in the subsequent years, it's very likely that they just learned that, hey, make them sign enough paper, that'll throw their butts in jail if they talk. And also rely on the patriotism. A lot of people talk about, oh, you can't keep secrets, people will talk. You got to remember, the people that involved in these things, they're kind of patriotic, right? When they're involved in these ultra secret things, they see themselves as working on, it's a privilege. They're working on something very, very special. And I don't hear a lot of people ever cite that when they say secrets can't be kept, because, most of us are like, by gosh, I know that, but it's important for national security and I ain't talking about it, So, they can rely on that. But in those days, MK Ultra was new, mind control stuff was new, hypnosis was new, and I would say that they were probably using these things for OPSEC, not in some evil mad scientist way.
Yeah, I could see that. Rob, Jeff, was there anything that you guys wanted to ask?
Not really.
I answered it all.
Well, I think you've blown their minds, Walter.
And I don't know exactly how new it all is. Maybe the way that through my dad I'm able to put some things together that have been out there. But I think if you look closely, you'll find that there are other situations, other accounts that are probably very similar to my dad's, that they might corroborate each other.
Right. Well, that's more what I meant. It's a lot of new associations and stuff for me.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting story. It's very fascinating. We've barely kind of scratched the surface, really, on some of the stuff that we've talked about tonight with this book. Mm-hmm. Where can people get the book and contact you if they have any questions or all that good stuff as usual?
The book right now is available on Kindle at Amazon.com. And if you go there and look for it, and you also see my name as author is highlighted, you click on that. That'll take you to my author page at Amazon that shows you all my other books as well. My blog is empireofthewheel.com. .blogspot.com. And I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I don't always, do a running commentary on my research on those two things, but I try to keep it relevant. But I can be contacted there, of course. And the printed edition, I'll announce it, but look for it soon on lulu.com, LULU.com, for those who prefer printed. I'm working on getting that squared away, so that'll be available soon as well.
Excellent. Very fascinating as always, Mr. Bosley. Thank you for coming on. We're going to close this section out because we will be stay on the line for us, and we will be right back on Conspirinormal. Okay, guys, we're back on Conspirinormal, and this is kind of an unusual show tonight. And we just spent about an hour and a half interview with Walter Bosley. This show is going to be a little bit longer because we were talking about at the beginning of the show about Pizzagate, and around about Monday or Tuesday, I ran across an article from one of our former guests that we've had on the show on the Disinfo website about Pizzagate. And I thought this was an interesting article that came from a slightly different perspective and maybe a little bit more of an insight to things that maybe in the kind of the more occult side of it. That guest that we had on is Thad McCracken. And Thad, welcome back to Conspirinormal. It's been a long time, man.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years, and thanks for having me on again.
Yeah.
Definitely. As I said when we were introducing, I wish I was almost on under some better circumstances, but this,
sure.
Pizzagate, some pretty ridiculous stuff, man. So yeah, I mean, I don't know really what you had covered up to this point. What I find so.
Well, we talked a little bit about what happened with Edgar Madison Welch, the guy who went into the Comet Ping Pong. Yeah. We moved that into a story of the wider elements of the whole Pizzagate thing, looking at James Alefantis, some of this weird stuff on Instagram, some of the artwork. And so, I had contacted you earlier in the week to come on and talk about your stance and how you feel about this whole mess.
Okay. So I can kind of give you a background on how I got roped into this, which it's because I talk about a lot about synchronicity, and weirdly enough, I just happened to have a slow day at work a couple weeks ago, and there's a site that I like called The Secret Sun, and they linked to this article on the Vigilant Citizen, which is this ridiculous, everybody, the world is run by the Illuminati, classic, like, creepy, the satanic panic has kind of turned into the Illuminati panic. Like there's this secret cabal of elites that are all into weird, cannibalistic sex magic, and anyways, I don't really follow this stuff. So I saw this piece and I kind of called out the guy on the site. I was like, do you believe that ridiculous site that you linked? And to much my surprise, he did. And tons of people in his forum also agreed with him. I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I was seeing more and more about Pizzagate in my feed. And so on this day, I started researching it. And in the course of doing this research, I realized that Marina Abramovich happened to be in town that night giving a sold-out lecture in Seattle where I live, and I was doing it on a cult day. So because like these synchronicities come together, I'm like, okay, that's just trippy. That I have a slow day at work. I just happened to start researching this.
A cult day being the anniversary of Aleister Crowley's death, correct?
Is that why it's a cult?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah,
I didn't even see that. I saw well, God, that's embarrassing then, because that's one thing I can say. I cannot stand Aleister Crowley, and I'm pretty open about that. I really think he's a cautionary tale of like what not to do with magic, and I think he was propped up by the Christian right to keep people away from magic. In all honesty, I mean that's the reason we talk about him is because he was a tabloid hero because he was willing to play the role of I'm an evil occultist, and it's just. it's sad. And the occult is just an embarrassing joke, which is part of why this idea that the elites run the world through this occult conspiracy is ridiculous, because the occult's a complete joke. Like, seriously, go to an occult convention. If you're scared by this stuff, like, seriously, there's something wrong with you. So I started researching this. So I wrote a piece, like, again, a lot because I just happened. It's my slow time where at the day job that I have. We're normally pretty busy, but around November it gets really slow. So I started writing this. So I wrote up this piece, and that ended up coming about a week before the shooter ended up walking. So it was like a minor story, and then a week later, this guy comes into a Comet Ping Pong with a gun, and then it becomes this national story. And so all of a sudden it's like, okay, that was like weirdly prescient. I wrote this piece about it. Like, I was tapping into something. And now it's been like I've posted stuff, and yeah, you want to talk about people divided on this. I mean, like, I posted stuff and people are just like, they're probably still commenting on it now. Like, I couldn't believe, like, days after I posted a couple things, like weeks, people are still commenting on these threads on like my Facebook page. And so I'd like to talk about just like from the premise. And the one thing I will say is there was a few emails, like I did some research, and I will fully admit that I haven't been up to date on research on this, and I'm never going to be, because I just don't care, because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so that's just politics in general. Like, I normally kind of follow politics, but politics in this last cycle hit such a record low of just turning into a ridiculous Jerry Springer like episode. Like, it was such a low level of dialogue and discourse that I don't
agreed with that.
Absolutely.
I don't even consider myself an intelligent person, but I couldn't watch the debates. I didn't pay attention to election stuff. I just couldn't. It was so low bar. It was so beneath me. And Pizzagate is one of those things that I also feel is so low bar and beneath me. And like there's part of me that is, I can't even believe I'm talking about this. That being said, there have been some emails where, like, when I was researching this several weeks ago, there was 2 emails connecting. Well, first of all, we need to talk about Abramovich, which I hate when you bring this up and people are like, I don't understand. What is Abramovich? It's like, this is where this all started. There is, for those not to know, there's a very famous performance artist named Marina Abramovich. And this whole scandal came out with WikiLeaks, it coming out through WikiLeaks that Hillary Clinton's campaign manager was invited to a dinner party at her place that he didn't go to. This is the scandal.
Right.
And from that,
Tony Podesta invited his brother John Podesta, say, "Are you available for this?" And John Podesta didn't even end up going to this spirit cooking event, which is primarily like performance artist stuff, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, apparently it was just dinner.
Yeah.
And let me explain. This gets a little bit deeper, because Tony Podesta and John Podesta are apparently art collectors. And this is what people don't know, is because this is why this was allowed to spread. And if you Google Marina Abramovich, Breitbart, or like Drudge Report, and you'll see these headlines. They used this email to connect her directly to Satan. And I'm like, I'm not exaggerating. This is like literally, we've now connected her to Aleister Crowley. She's some crazy devil-worshipping sex magician. I heard some people calling her a cannibal Satanist, and some people that, I almost like respect their opinion. The problem with all of that is she's not an occultist at all. There's no base. Not only that, her campaign manager got invited to a dinner party. As a term, Abramovich, I did some research. I hadn't heard of her, but in the little bit of research I saw, that I did, it was pretty easy to suss out the fact that she's been around forever. She's crazy famous. I realized that I had heard of her because she did this performance called The Artist is Present, which ended up getting turned into a movie. I think like Jay-Z was involved and stuff. And another thing is, like, when I was researching this and she was giving a sold out talk in Seattle, I realized that like Amazon was sponsoring the thing, the Seattle Times, Nordstrom's, which is like the highest end department store. So another way of putting it is like, this woman is so uncontroversial to most people that like nothing, like literally huge conservative corporations have no problem sponsoring this woman's work. Museums all over the world have featured this lady's work. Like, nobody considers this person controversial at all. And yet now we've linked, Clinton's campaign manager gets invited to a dinner party, and suddenly we've linked Hillary Clinton to Satan. Like it's just, so right there, that's ridiculous.
When that happened, we talked about it a little bit on the show with another guest, and which really we were talking about John Podesta in light of the WikiLeaks and with Tom DeLonge of Blink-182 about UFO disclosure, which he's big into as well, John Podesta. And so we were talking about that, and I said at the time, and I still maintain it, there's nothing there with the Marina Abramovich stuff. That to me was just, it was almost just picking stuff up out of nothing. But it got put into the Pizzagate narrative. Later on. This
is where the Pizzagate narrative started too. Yeah. This is now all of a sudden, now we've identified Democrats are involved with Satan. Right? Like, this is where it starts. We have linked.
And right in the middle of the right in October, right in the middle of the election year.
Right before the election. Suddenly, we've linked the Democratic Party to ritualistic, to Satan and ritualistic occultism. There is no link in there. But and I think it's important to point out, not only that, we're entering into some really utterly, I mean, it's propaganda writing, obviously. Obviously, this is political propaganda. Obviously. And now we're getting into just ridiculous. Now we're judging people because of the kind of art that they make. And I see all these sites, and I saw a ton just in the last week, linking to performances that Marina has given and showing the darker aspects of some of her work and just parading about like, oh, see, we proved that she was a Satanist. Too many coincidences here. I saw like 4 or 5 strains just in my feed, and I wasn't even looking in the last week. Just pictures of her cherry picking the creepiest aspects of her art and then saying, we've identified a Satanist because look at this art, which is insane because like one thing that it shows me more than anything is that most people in America, myself included, don't really understand the art world. Because if this was, say, Stephen King or Wes Craven or, a horror director or even, like, say, the band Ghost BC. I don't know if you've heard of this band.
Yeah, they've been coming up a lot lately.
Yes. So say this was any of these bands, this wouldn't even be a scandal. People would be like, that's obviously art, you idiot. Like, the guy wrote horror books. He's obviously not literally a Satanist. But since it's this weird, like, performance art thing that people don't understand, all of a sudden it's just like, these are real occult rituals that they're doing. She's a Satanist. There's, and it's like, and I've seen, and it's like, so this is a dangerous precedent. And this is what worries me so much about what's going on in Pizzagate is the association that your taste in art somehow proves that you're into spiritual practices that you're not into, evil spiritual practices that you're not into, which is ridiculous. Like, everybody, I think a lot of people watch horror movies. Like, I'm not even a huge fan of horror movies, but I watch them. And so anyways, so from Abramovic, we've already created, okay, now we're looking for we're looking for ties from, the Clinton campaign to Satanists, and they find ties to this guy Alefantis. And there's the one thing I'll say about the whole scandal is apparently some other emails referencing pizza encoded words have come up since I've been researching it. I saw 2. There was one talking about a pizza flyer that connects him to Comet Ping Pong. And of course the implication is that pizza is a code word for pedophilia, which is a stretch, especially when you're talking about a pizza chef. In this email, this is the only thing that ties to Comet Ping Pong, is that this email, they're talking about a pizza flyer. It was for a benefit for Hillary Clinton, and they weren't talking in code. You can see the flyer. They took Hillary Clinton's logo, and they put a pizza on it. Like, so it wasn't code. Like, the pizza logo was, look, there's the pizza logo. And this was obviously talking about this event. The email was about a month before, they designed the flyer for this event. So clearly obvious what they're talking about. The only other thing that ties Alefantis to this is an email apparently in 2008. I didn't even see any of this 2 weeks ago. Apparently this is since now they've updated. Okay, we have one more email that ties to Comet Ping Pong. And that's Tony Podesta, or I guess John Podesta, has his birthday party at Comet Ping Pong every year. And at one point back in 2008, the guy from Comet Ping Pong, James Alefantis, emailed him and said, sorry, I didn't get to make you a pizza last night.
I've seen that email. Yeah.
Okay. So those are the only 2 emails, and that's what I'm saying about the scandal. Maybe there was other stuff involving coded language, but on the tying it to Comet Ping Pong, like, no. Like, there's 2 emails. One, they're obviously talking about pizza, and the other one, I'm sorry, like, pedophile, I should have made you a pizza. Well, one, he's a pizza chef. 2, That's what people. I would make you a child prostitute. Like that doesn't even really make sense. Like so. I mean, so both those emails, and that's it. So now here from this though, they start digging through Instagram accounts, and not only that, just going after artists. And again, this is the disturbing precedent. Is this we're playing off people's misunderstanding of art. People don't understand the visual art world, and so and this isn't even visual art. And this is what strikes me is like I'm a musician. I've played in places like Comet Ping Pong. And I saw all this stuff, and so all of a sudden they're saying, "Oh, look at all these coincidences." And the coincidences they're pointing out is there was some art in the venue that they deemed represented pedophilia, which it doesn't. When I wrote my piece, there was a guy named Arrington Dionisio that was being accused. One thing that he pointed out to me is that art was taken down 5 years ago. I didn't see that on any. Like his art was taken down 5 years ago because it got apparently barraged by ping pong balls so much. They have rotating art in the place, but weirdly enough. Since this is blown up, of course, he's had a huge uptick in his art, and it's been a sales bump, which is exactly what I said in my piece. Same thing with Abramovich. Abramovich was coming out with a book right before the scandal hit. So and now there's like high profile pieces in Vice and all over the place. This is like the best PR for her. She could have imagined. And weirdly enough, same with this other artist. So now we're getting in this dangerous world where there is really no link between like any pedophilia, anything, and Comet Ping Pong, and yet everybody is now like somebody brought a rifle into it. And the disturbing precedent, though, is that we're saying this art means this, and we've proven that you're into pedophilia and the occult because of your taste in art, which is utterly insane and just such a creepy snapshot of the political climate of what's going on. And like this kind of logic needs to die now. This idea that I got to be honest, it's middle Americans making yourselves look like complete Philistines, could you look more dumb and uncultured, because like, I'm sorry, like I saw so many people like, what kind of venue that allows children would have art in it? And it's like, it's not even controversial art. Like, what are you really? This is where we're at.
Well, see,
you can't imagine that like a place would allow children and have art hanging in it. Like, this is what we've gotten in this dialogue. It's nuts.
I said something very similar to what you just said there in the intro, and I think my point was not necessarily that it's art, because I myself have an appreciation for art, and I understand some of the more modern art and some of that. My dad's an art teacher, for God's sake, so I know some of this stuff, but it's like some of the themes that seem to be in that artwork seem almost inappropriate in some ways for a place where that has sleepovers for children.
Are you talking about Arrington Dionisio's art?
Is that the one that has the kind of weird, kind of misshapen people, like kind of like green? And the one I think you put it. Yes. I think you actually put that in the article.
Yeah, it was up there 5 years ago. 2, B, the articles, several articles I wrote, so it was taken down 5 years ago. So right off the bat. B, look at his art. It's not demonic. He involves nudity. It involves sex. It's some surrealist sex art. He gives you an artist statement about what his art is actually about, not what they're telling you it's about. It's about ecstatic states of consciousness and embracing sexuality. And it does maybe come from a more shamanic theme to that extent. Sure. It involves it. But like there wasn't nudity in the pieces that were in Comet Ping Pong. That stuff didn't involve sex. It was like people holding other people's heads. It was maybe slightly creepy in a way. I don't personally find it creepy, but then you get these online commentators like taking more of his gruesome art and saying, "Oh, but look," and like, okay, so you took his two most, and this is the same thing with Abramovich. It's like you're taking their more gruesome stuff and saying this is what this artist does, not even letting them explain what their art is actually about, and then explaining it for their audience. Oh, by the way, we've telling you what this person's art is about, which it's not. And 2, you're taking art that isn't even involved with this in any way, and that was so disturbing about the propaganda writing I saw. It is taking art that has nothing to do with this. Like some of the art that is being shown has absolutely nothing to do with this. Like one of the pieces I was saying was like, Tony, if you look at the fine print, you realize that Tony Podesta owns a piece of art by this artist, but not the pieces that they're showing you. So they're literally like, look at these horrible artists and implying that Podesta owns this stuff, and really they just know that Tony Podesta owns one piece of art by this person, and we have no idea what that piece of art is.
Let me ask you about this. One of the things that I think Tony Podesta owns, and we mentioned this as well, the man that is arched over onto himself, and Tracy Twyman, hardly a Christian researcher, our evangelical Christian researcher, some of the other things that she looks into, and we've had her on the show before. So she comes from a very, almost an occult background herself. Are you familiar with Tracy Twyman?
No, I'm actually not. No.
She has made the point that this guy that's arched over, that's an occult symbol, but also that it's very similar to a pose that Jeffrey Dahmer would put the dead bodies of his victims into. I mean, that's a little strange.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. But my question is, who made that piece of art? Do you know?
I don't.
Do you know? Okay, because my point is, you could actually ask the artist what that represents, and he would tell you. And this is what I hate about this scandal, is that we're not doing that. With Arrington D. Nice, he's like, I don't know. Yeah, I've heard people make that too. Oh, this is the pose of Jeffrey Dahmer. It's like, that's what somebody on YouTube told you. He's an artist. I bet that piece of art cost a lot of money. Because, I mean, again, we're just ignorant to way that the art world is a weird elite rich people thing. I don't deny that. It's weird.
Yes.
I don't entirely understand it myself.
Yes.
My wife actually has an MFA in art, and that's what's so funny about this. Like, I didn't know who Abramovich was, although it turned out that I had heard of her, the Artist is Present thing that she did. Like, she's like the only performance artist I'd actually heard of. But the second I brought up Abramovich to my wife, who has an MFA in art, she's like, oh yeah, I'm just like, just like, she's like a rock star in art. Like, if you are into art, she's famous. And like, by questioning her and telling people that she's a Satanist, you're making yourself look incredibly stupid and uncultured, Well,
I think your wife and just about anybody that lives in Manhattan, that lives in New York City, that knows who she is, are going to look at this stuff and they're going to say, yeah, so.
Yeah, exactly. Huh. Have you watched the spirit cooking thing that she's being accused of?
No, I haven't.
Have you watched any of the videos? And that's what's so funny is they're cherry picking images from her work and showing you the creepiest part. And there's videos of these exact same thing on YouTube, which I post on my place. I'm like, watch them. It's not that creepy. The one thing that they did, which was slightly creepy, it's like it is slightly creepy. One, she's an artist. She says straight. She reads her artist statement out loud, talking about how her art is supposed to make people uncomfortable, which makes them ask questions. So she's telling you straight up, yes, I'm using disturbing imagery, and she's telling you exactly why she is doing this, right? And not only that, but then like hunky dudes carry out Deborah Harry, and Deborah Harry sings Heart of Glass. There's nothing creepy about it. And then they both eat. There's a Deborah Harry cake, and there's a cake of Marina Abramovich, and then they both eat those cakes. Again, it's a tad creepy on one level. That's the point. Yeah. Horror movies are creepy. And the other thing that I pointed out too is the weird, utterly insane hypocrisy that we're getting into, because this, of course, was unearthed by 4chan. We know it was a political unearthed, quote unquote, by 4chan, who are big in this. 4chan is a hub for hentai. Do you guys know what hentai is?
Yeah, we know. I know what hentai is.
Do you want to talk about creepy art? Okay, because I got to be honest. I've researched Marina Abramovich and a lot of this stuff. I find hentai 100 times creepier than anything I saw. And just to explain to your audience what hentai is animated demon rape porn, often with multi-tentacle demons violating women with their huge phallic penises. And so the guys that unearthed this supposedly satanic art in this venue are simultaneously have no problem with beating off watching demon rape porn. It's proud of this. So this is the level of psychosis that we're getting in here. And again, it's clearly politically motivated. I think one of the most interesting things that I did read about this was like, again, there's nothing tying comic ping pong. And again, the other thing, if people aren't aware why this is a problem and why someone who's an artist and everyone that is an artist should be a bit terrified of this, it's like part of this coincidental evidence involving comic ping pong went, and like this has been a music venue for years. People are literally going back of their list of bands that have played there over the last 20 years. And let me explain to somebody, if you're not a musician, like a lot of times you play shows, you have no association with that venue that you just played. Right. You booked a band there. You're not associated with the venue. You played a show there. You might have not even booked the show yourself. Somebody might have asked you to play and you're like, cool. And you went and played. I've played tons of shows in venues. So like this idea that, and that's what people are doing. People are saying this band played at this venue 5 years ago. They have this one band from Denver is like a metal band that had a jokey pizza logo with a pentagram cut in it. And now they're being brought in this because, oh my God, they played a show there like 3 years ago. Clearly that logo is,
okay. I got to say, I agree with about like 95% or probably more of what you're saying here. But real quick, you've talked a lot about precedent, and I want to bring up something else along those lines. And that's the Reddit banning any and all conversation about this, trying to prevent a witch hunt, which I understand. But at the same time, I don't think blocking communication is a healthy way to to fix situations like this. And in the future, this kind of thing is going to become more and more likely with social media and with the internet and with people getting together and people grabbing ideas and people thinking that anything they see online is news and is actual information.
Yeah.
How do you feel about all that?
Well, yeah, no, and you want to get into that topic, and man, the whole news versus fake news thing. Well, for one, it's interesting. I need to actually write a piece about this. Like, I write for a site called disinfo.com, right?
Right.
I'm actually going to write a piece literally that's about how you shouldn't trust things that you read on disinfo.com, because one of our most popular pieces, in the last year, was about this. It's like stuff I ignore, but this Illuminati conspiracy thing, and I ignore this stuff. You guys probably know way more about this. So because I watch it and it's just like so obviously Christian propaganda to me. It's always Christians. It's always like, oh my God, the elites are into demon worship. And, nobody cares about the evils that the Christian church does or whatever, or thinks about the fact that maybe if there was demons, the first thing they do was infiltrate religion. It's always, so I find the Illuminated conspiracy stuff to be so laughable 90% of the time. And I've watched tons of these videos. But so we had this piece on that was about this. There's an Egyptian eye doctor in Oregon who built Egyptian statues in his yard. And there's a story that made rounds about how it's again, housing a satanic occult thing. One of the most popular things on our site, more popular than anything I've written. And it has been for years. It's total BS. And I realized the site got written up on Weird Oregon years ago. And I remember clicking on it, and just right in the comments, you could see people from the area on Facebook. And Facebook was obviously locating these people, and they're all talking about, oh yeah, it's an Egyptian family. I was just, I babysat their kids. Yeah, it's nothing weird. It's like, a family celebrating their culture. So again, we have this fake story that's been one of the most popular things on our site, which is 100% bullshit. It is 100% nonsense, and that's been one of the most popular things on our site. But we're also getting this territory though, where all the major media outlets are increasingly being bought and conglomerated into one. Back in 1980, we passed laws, and it's not a partisan thing. The Democrats and Republicans are just as bad at selling out the media and letting them monopolize and letting them basically say whatever they want without fact checking. We had laws and we gutted these laws,
right?
And so now all the major media outlets are owned by 5 companies, and now they're going around talking about fake news when they've been corrupt from the jump. And yet, fake news is also a problem, especially when you're looking at that. Before the election, yeah, and I mean the CIA just came out, and BuzzFeed, and all these places scooped it. It's there's these sites that popped up 2 months before the election in Russia and just started spreading all this fake news story. So we do have to deal with the fact that yes, it's now become cheaper to spread propaganda, overseas than that has ever been, and we've been involved with elections for years. So yes, there is this, and that's what people don't understand about the fake news problem is that. The Washington Post or they are accountable, since they're such big organizations, there's a level of accountability there. If they just play blatantly wrong stuff, they can get sued. There's a legal problem. I mean, look at Gawker and what happened with them and whatnot, and Rolling Stone, they had to retract this huge story. So there's a bit of accountability. And with fake news, there's there's zero accountability, especially when it's in a foreign country and a website that was set up 2 months ago. There's zero accountability for this stuff. And that's what I don't think people understand about this conversation is well, we need to regulate this stuff. But anyways, good. Go ahead.
As I said before about the whole idea of fake news, I mean, fake news is a real thing. We deal with it all the time. All these stupid clickbait sites that are trying to sell you things. That happens for sure. But, people asking questions, trying to explore, trying to do research, to me, that's a little different. And there is a dangerous precedent when you try to say that is fake news, because you can just say, don't believe it. I want to just, though, read a little bit from your article, if you don't mind, because I think this is the main point, and the main reason that I wanted to get you on about this is that although, I have questions about some of the evidence in this whole Pizzagate thing. As I said before, I'm 50-50. But I don't want to have this mentality at the same time where there's a witch hunt mentality. And this is what you say about this. And I'm going to read 2 paragraphs. What Pizzagate amounts to is a literal witch hunt. I think what's hilarious is that it's right in tune with the witch hunts of yesteryear, which, if you were paying attention, typically had nothing to do with witchcraft, but were actually about slandering people with charges of Satan worship for business political reasons. That's a very good point. And then in the next, there's another paragraph a little bit further down. And I'm not going to read the whole article, but we're in a new era here. Let's face it. The satanic panic of the 80s never went away. It was just transformed into an elite Illuminati conspiracy panic. This has been boiling under the surface forever. I've seen all the quote unquote evidence. I've watched the terrible YouTube videos. I found them full of the loosest of loose connections imaginable, to the point that they're actually quite funny. Why are they funny? Because they're all made by Christians accusing occultists of secretly running the world. Last time I checked, nearly every publicly elected official in America is Christian, and the biggest occult conventions only draw a few hundred people. No real evidence digging needed to unearth that fact, which is why these things have always been a total joke up until this point. But now opportunist Looney Tunes like Alex Jones actually have the ear of not only the president, but the entire American war machine surveillance state. And then you go on to talk about how Alex Jones.
And trust me, the funny thing about that is I started ignoring Alex Jones so long ago. So like, I haven't paid attention to how loony that guy is. But yeah, no, look, it wasn't hard for me to find quotes where, and this is my point, is like, they're linking, I'm not joking. And it's so funny because of the comic ping pong incident that the media has gotten, it got a lot of mainstream media attention this week because of the shooter that came in. And none of them are really talking about the art angle like I was talking. And nobody's talking about the fact that they're not just accusing them of running a pedophile ring. They're accusing them of running a satanic, possibly cannibalistic pedophile ring.
Yeah.
So it literally is a witch hunt. Like, this is, and Alex Jones apparently has been quoted as saying that Hillary Clinton has like ripped up children with her bare hands, and not only. And not only that, but yeah, and I quote in this, like, that she smells like Satan, that her and Barack Obama are literally demons from hell. I mean, this is what this guy is implying. And there's an element to this, which is, like I said, the Abramovich thing was tying Hillary Clinton directly to Satan. That's what they were doing with that tool with propaganda. And yeah, man, like I said, I've tried to avoid what's going on politically because it seems so beneath my intelligence, and I think a lot of people have just like turned away. And the one thing that I've learned, though, is people really, really want to believe that, the world is run by this secret Illuminati. Like, people want to believe that so bad. And that's what I've learned from Pizzagate more than anything, is you're telling people something, like, to most people, this is confirmation of something that they've wanted to believe for a really long time. Because whereas I tuned out these videos years ago, because I watch them. And again, I think I have a unique perspective of being an occultist. Like, my point is, like, yeah, there's a spirit world. There are forces that are controlling our world that we don't understand at all. I think these forces, definitely, at least what I've been shown, are more involved with controlling the drug war, controlling the pharmaceutical industry, infiltrating religion, first and foremost. I mean, obviously, that's the easiest way to control people. Once you reach your tendrils in and convince them that you understand the spirit world, that's how you manipulate them. And like all this stuff, this dates back centuries, this war between Christianity and the occult. And, I'd urge people to actually like look into the occult, maybe experiment with some of this stuff. Like, it's not what you think it is, and yes, there is an element in the occult of talking to demons and communicating. And I write about this myself. I have an entire book coming out about communications that I've had with demonic forms of intelligence. And my point would be, like, it's not what you think it is. As long as you're looking at this from a good versus evil, warring factions perspective, like, it's not going to make any sense. You have to look at it from a more yin-yang, balanced perspective, two sides of the same coin. And like, I don't think these forces are fighting each other. I think they're working together. And I could go on. I should probably come on another time and talk about that stuff. But
yeah, we will do that. Yes.
People really, really want to believe that our government is, and mostly, this is Christian paranoia stuff. And before, again, the other thing that I find frustrating about the response to this is so many I'm not a Democrat, and I'll put that out. I supported Bernie Sanders. Like, I'm more of that. Like, Democrats don't even go nearly as far as I would go, as far as like what we need to do to, say, protect the environment. I think we need to start thinking about shrinking the economy. Like, Democrats have been bought and sold forever. They're, right-wing Republicans from 20 years ago. Like, I'm not a Democrat. And so many people are accusing me of being partisan in this. And I'm like, no, I'm pointing out that something is partisan does not make you partisan. My point is that this happened right before the election, and you're trying to tie Hillary Clinton to Satan. And no, yeah, I was so frustrated reading these Reddit articles too, where people are talking about how the links to Epstein, which that's valid. It's creepy that Hillary Clinton, and then but conveniently ignoring that Donald Trump is tied to the same guy.
Right? Yeah, we made that.
We talked about that earlier.
So conveniently.
Right.
Just Hillary Clinton's tied to this guy, and all this talk about how she's tied to this guy, and just zero talk about how Donald Trump's tied to the exact same guy. It's just like has probably even stronger ties to the same guy. I mean, I agree. And the other thing about that too, that is a weird leap in logic. I saw so much, and one, people have talked about this. One article I read is when you slander people with pedophiles. I mean, those people are treated worse in prison than murderers. Pedophiles. So it's such an emotionally charged thing to accuse somebody. And I saw so many people arguing, for the possibility of this. And their argument was like, but what about Jimmy Savile? What about, there have been occult pedophile rings? And like, are you're kidding me, right, man? I mean, like, Adam, like, murders happen every day. So I guess you're a murderer? Like, literally, this is the logic we're working with here is that, because this thing kind of happens, then this person is guilty of that thing that happens. Like, this is...
Yeah.
All logic has gone out the window. All logic, all rational has gone out the window. It's just like you're kidding. Like, I saw so many people make that argument. But pedophile rings have been exposed. And I'm like, yeah, but... One, very few of them have had anything to do with the occult, and two, the vast majority of sex trafficking has nothing to do with occult anything, and that's important to keep in mind. Most sex abuse happens between family members, people, friends, close friends. There have been occult pedophile rings exposed, and yet. Yeah, I mean, that's what people were arguing with this when it was like, I actually have a cousin that like has a charity that's what he does is he rescues kids that have been sold into sex. Like, I'm not arguing that this doesn't happen. I'm just arguing that just because something happens doesn't mean that a certain person is guilty of it.
I think Rob wanted to jump in here real quick.
Well, I just wanted to say something. It's very similar to that argument is what I've been saying, and I don't want it to be misconstrued, is that because this kind of thing does happen and there's a precedent for this kind of thing happening, that it's worth looking at and investigating and looking deeper into. And that's why we've gotten into it ourselves. And that's why, I think a lot of other people have gotten into it and it's kind of gotten carried away. But I still just hung up on that cutoff of communication that, news sources saying it's fake news and Reddit saying we're not going to talk about this anymore. I don't think that's a solution.
I haven't addressed the Reddit thing. I think the Reddit thing is, let's face it, I mean, most of these tech companies are probably pretty lefty. And, Not only that, I mean, I think this is borderline into hate speech. And I think Reddit might have banned it because they were worried about, say, potentially somebody coming into the restaurant with a gun. This is why they've blocked all these people because, there is a precedent of hate speech and we have laws against, things like hate speech. So it's a fine line.
It is. Well, and it's going to get addressed very soon.
They apparently banned it on AboveTopSecret.com too, which is like Disinfo's sister site, which I never really read. It took over Disinfo, but I noticed that I just happened to log in there, which I really don't that often, and they had banned it there too. And it's just got, I mean, we are into the point, and this is the problem because we have to like start regulating supposed fake news, and yet it's a supreme hypocrisy of the corporate news telling us we have to regulate fake news when they've just been propaganda for years and have gotten progressively worse, and they're just as responsible for say if they're not.
And that's the other side of my argument is that them telling us like this is what you need to listen to, this is what you don't need to listen to, this is what you need to hear. Like that scares the crap out of me.
The 5 things you need to know.
Yeah.
And only those 5 things. Well,
it's also creepy though that now foreign nations can easily meddle in our elections. That's something we have to address. Not only that, like I said, my point is we need to have some.
We've been meddling in others' elections for a long time. I think some of that might be just the chickens coming home to roost. But that's a whole other topic. Thad, thank you so much for coming on, buddy.
Absolutely.
Tell everybody where they can contact you and also get your books.
It's facebook.com Thaddeus.McCracken. On Amazon, I have a book out called Transmissions from Outside of Time right now. And it's just look for Transmissions from Outside of Time on Amazon. And you can download it for only $4. It has nothing to do with conspiracy theories. That's the weird thing about me being on talking about conspiracy theories. I normally avoid this stuff like the plague. Like it's not really something that I like alien stuff. I find that interesting, but like most conspiracy theories are stuff that I avoid on purpose. I'll just leave it at that.
Excellent. Well, Thad, we're going to close out this section, guys. We'll be back to close out the show on Conspirinormal. Well, we've gone on so long with this show that we lost Jeff.
We did, which is, I think that's mostly tragic because I think that I think his opinions parallel Thad's almost perfectly.
Yes,
everything from the continuation of Satanic Panic to just the kind of absurdity of a lot of the coincidental little details that people keep bringing up about it. And, again, I agree with a lot of what Thad had to say. It was great to have him on. I didn't know where he was going to go with it, but, it was a refreshing take. And I think it kind of laid it all to rest for me personally.
Well, I think having read the article, it just gave me another point of view. Mm-hmm. I was really kind of leaning towards that, to his point of view, but then I kind of looked into, as I said before, I looked into things, and, I'm kind of, it's 50-50 for me, man. And like I said before, I think this stuff is going to probably just eventually just end up going away, and we're just going to be like Pizzagate. What was that?
Right.
Harambe?
Who?
Yeah, it's just the latest. It's just the latest thing, and it'll probably pass. And I'm sure there will be people that will still be asking questions a year from now, but it won't be as popular. It won't be as a big deal as it was.
No, and like he said, the ties to the Democratic Party and Hillary. So I'm surprised it hasn't faded quicker since that's
right.
Since the election's over.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying. Like I think Trump comes in. I think you're going to have a little bit more of a. There's going to be more of a focus on that and what he's doing or what he's not doing. I think you'll see a lot more of it. So yeah. Anyway, marathon show tonight. As you guys probably noticed, there was no Luke. He's been MIA for the last few shows. So we don't know what's going on with him. But we do have Jeff, and he's pretty much become like another co-host for the show. I want to make an announcement real quick before we go. And we, in the past, we've been doing this show now for, God, it's been almost 5 years. It will be 5 years in March. And I've always envisioned this show as being, a free exchange of information. And Rob and I have talked about it, and we've talked about, doing donations and doing funding for the show. And until now, we've decided that we're going to start doing that. So.
But the good news is we're not going to use ads. You're not going to get bombarded by any kind of commercials or any kind of crap that you don't want to hear. The show is still going to be free for anyone who wants to listen to it.
Yeah. I mean, I may put the occasional commercial for Joe, and I'm still waiting on one from Heather,
right,
for her tarot stuff.
But that's just people we believe in that we're supporting. Right. We're not getting money for that.
Right, yeah. We don't get money for that. So, guys, we have set up a couple of things, and we're going to have two ways to do this. If you enjoy the show, here are the two ways, and you want to help us out. We have Patreon, which is apparently a big popular thing. And with Patreon, you're going to get some things. There's some tiers there, but there's like a $1 tier, a $2 tier. I think it goes from all the way up to $100. And you get different things in each of those tiers. We're going to try to have some special content that is only for the Patreons. We don't know exactly if that's going to be for have guests on and talk to them. We may do that, but what we're thinking about doing now is we're going to have like some kind of series that we can put up about some more maybe historical aspects of conspiracy theory and maybe some other paranormal things that we could talk about that we don't normally get to talk about on the show. And these things are going to be 30 minutes long, not 3 hours long like this show has turned out to be. But so if you sign up for Patreon, and that's at patreon.com, Patreon, patreon.com/Conspirinormal, Conspirinormal. You can sign up and become a patron.
And not only that, well, I'll put a link on the website to it as well, but Absolutely. It also lets you join more of a Conspirinormal community. Even at the lowest donation rate, you can get on the website and, you can post your own thoughts. You can talk to other listeners. You can, we'll post some stuff on there, pictures and little blog posts and whatnot, and just try to build this into more of a community instead of just a host and a listener base, and just kind of bring us all together in on that.
Yep. Very good point, Rob. And so that's the Patreon aspect. The second one will be just a donate button that we're going to have on our site, and we'll probably have on the Podomatic. Right now, Patreon is going to be on the Podomatic site, and where you can access the shows directly, and also on Conspirinormal.com.
Right. Whereas Patreon is a subscription thing to become, to join this and help it keep rolling and help it grow. The donation is just a one-time thing. If you've enjoyed the show, right? If you've been listening for a while and you want to see it grow and get bigger and do better and sound better and all that, then you're welcome to jump on and do that as well.
Yep. It's good. It's hard for us to talk about this because we're not normally the type of guys that we feel like we're begging for money or something like that. I always hated watching PBS when I was a kid, and they come on and beg for money for 30 minutes, that kind of thing. It's just, if you enjoy the show, if you like it, if you feel like you get some value out of it, then we're willing to put the value in to give back to you. So the value for value model is very important here. And a lot of other podcasts do that as well. And that's all we're asking. We also realize that right now it's Christmas time. People are out buying gifts. So,
Right. And the normal show is going to stay the normal show, and it's going to stay free. So
maybe not 3 hours long, but
maybe not.
Is what it is. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Next time we have Joshua Cutchin coming back, the Cutch.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about his new book, The Brimstone Deceit. And I'm hoping we're going to finish out the year with Dr. Future. There are possibly some issues with that, but we are also at the end of the year, very last show of 2016, we're going to do our year in review, talking about some of the guests that we've had on, and maybe some of the news stories looking back at the wonderful year that has been 2016.
Man, I can't wait to say goodbye to 2016.
It's not been that bad.
It's been pretty bad.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. And on behalf of Jeff and I guess Luke, thank you for listening. We'll be back next time on
Conspirinormal.
Yeah.